I think I'm pretty radical in saying that Bitcoin is going to $1 million. It's going to $10 million because 99.9% of the world doesn't see that. Even I think the majority of people who own Bitcoin, they don't quite understand it. They're going to dump over the coming years because they don't quite understand what it is. They're going to dump it for dollars, the way that I see it. Institutions are going to bump the price up to price out anybody who can't afford it. The US government is $36 trillion in debt. They're supposed to be the ones who enforce the use of this currency, but they're shorting it. So just that, it shows you that this entire system it's broken. It doesn't work the way it's supposed to.
Mr. Rajat Soni, thank you so much for joining me here today, being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Brandon.
Pleasure is all mine. So I would love to touch on some of the things that anyone who has the pleasure of following you on Twitter has seen a million ideas from you, your thoughts. I mean, you do such an incredible job of documenting your thoughts and just really your journey, which is probably the most interesting thing about human beings in a way. What's your journey? How do you come to these things, your thoughts and where you are as a human being currently? But you've been really on this, the XRP thing lately, the altcoins and the things that are happening. I would love for you to unpack this because I think it is very important to understand the differences of Bitcoin versus crypto and what's going on here. And just the average person getting into this just doesn't know. You know, we all come into it really the same way in a sense, and not knowing and trying to figure things out. So I'd love for you to touch on this and your thoughts and discoveries and what you've been writing about the last few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like going into a lot of, I think let's start with, I think one of the worst cryptocurrencies that you can own is XRP, because first of all of it was given to one institution. The majority of it, something like 80 billion of it, was given to Ripple. 20% of it,
there's only 100 billion total.
100 billion, yeah, 100 billion total. So 80 billion were given to one institution. Then, from what I know, maybe I'm wrong here. If anybody wants to correct me, go for it. 20% of it, the rest of it, was given to the executive. So all they're doing is, in that time, ever since it was issued, I don't know when it was issued, but in that time, they've just been dumping it on public. And then on top of this, I came across I discovered that XRP doesn't even have a full ledger. And that made me laugh. And I was just thinking, wow, how are people falling for this? So I just made it my mission over the last few weeks to inform as many people as possible, because my own family and friends are falling for it. My own family friends are asking me, hey, I bought some XRP. Where do you think it's going? And I tell them, hey, it's going to zero against Bitcoin. The dollar value doesn't really matter. The dollar value will probably increase forever. But then in terms of Bitcoin, it'll definitely decrease forever, because dollars are infinite. Bitcoin is finite. The ultimate altcoin, the ultimate ship coin, I guess you can call it, is the dollar, because it can be printed out of nothing. It's rewarded to people to buy whatever they want to. Let's say, for example, if you go to a bank and you wanted to buy a house that you can't afford, your bank can print more dollars and give it to you. And people are so confused about how real estate prices just keep going up. They keep rising. It's because the base layer money is corrupt. You can create as much of it as you want to. You can keep adding it to the economy. We know that XRP, I don't know for sure, but from what I know, XRP can't be printed, but giving all of it to one entity is the same as printing it and giving an unlimited amount to someone whenever you want to. With XRP, for example, the Ripple can just dump it onto the public whenever they want to. When they see the price go up, they can liquidate some of the premium, bring the price back down, bring it crashing, and restart the whole cycle again. So the entire thing is completely manipulated. Bitcoin is different because, of course, number one, there's that finite supply. Number two, nobody got Bitcoin for free. Everybody had to actually use their time, effort, and energy to produce it, to actually unlock it from the network. So that's a differentiation on its own, and I don't think that that's something that you can get away from. Other than that, I mean, the main things that I look for when I look at altcoins is I don't even look at altcoins as what I want to invest in. I look at them as, how do I differentiate them from Bitcoin? Like, how do I know that this thing is a scam? The main things that I look at, number one, is the unlimited supply. So for example, ETH has an unlimited supply. Solana has an unlimited supply. So if something has an unlimited supply, why would you want to save in it? That's the first question that I ask. Why would you want to save in something that somebody else can print? And then the second thing is, if there's a CEO, if there's a company behind it, again, that just eliminates the cryptocurrency, because that means that it can be controlled It can be taken over. There's a marketing budget. There's a marketing team. What if those run out? Eventually, they will. And where are you going to? How are you going to pump up your coin at that point? Eventually, you'll run out of all those. Eventually, you won't have enough funds to keep pumping your coin, and it will crash. So those are the things that I look at. I think, like I said, XRP is probably the top of the actually the bottom of the trash heap. It's the worst of the worst. And I mean, other than that, it just the other ones may be valuable. I don't know. I don't really care. The only thing that I'm in it for in this case is saving my value for the future.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, I would love for you to touch on the difference between money, like if price went away. I think this is always like an interesting way to think about it. Like if price went away of the US dollar price of Bitcoin, the US dollar price of XRP, all these things, can I use it still? Right? Like, is it a money still? Can I use it? It is, right? Like if the dollar price went away of Ethereum or a lot of these altcoins, you can't use it for anything of real substantial value. Like you could maybe create, whatever meme coins on Solana or Ethereum or whatever it is, but it's like, what's the value that society is getting? And I really do feel like we touched offline about like this good versus evil fight in a way where, it feels like all the altcoins are just this, we're trying to recreate this same fiat scam system where Bitcoin is just a completely separate system. And you have these two factions, and like everyone thinks, and everyone from the outside looks at all of us and puts us all together, right? Where like we're all like in the same crypto boat or something. It's like no, that's not true at all. Like these are completely different boats. So I feel like is it not?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of the people who have these altcoins, they're looking for an exit plan. For me, for a lot of Bitcoiners that I know, Bitcoin is the exit plan, and that's what differentiates it. So with, let's say, for example, I like doing a lot of deep dives into just random cryptocurrency channels on YouTube, just because that way I know if somebody's being genuine. I know if somebody's being if somebody actually knows what they're talking about. Like,
what are
for
they talking
example,
about
with your
behind
channel.
closed doors? Yeah,
Exactly. Like
yeah.
with your channel, for example, I know that you're genuine. I know that you know what you're talking about because you provide great information. Like the conversations that you have are genuine. You have in-depth conversations with people in the Bitcoin space who want to talk to you, who want to talk about Bitcoin. I've noticed that a lot of altcoins, what they do is they talk about price targets. They talk about, okay, let's say XRP, for example. They think, they say, I have a long term bag and I have a short term bag, and I'm going to trade my short term bag. I'm going to go into real estate, or I'm going to go to this other cryptocurrency, whatever their cryptocurrency is. Their plan is to give away their cryptocurrency at some point. They need exit liquidity. That's essentially it. On the other hand, with Bitcoiners, we don't need exit liquidity. We want to buy as much. If Bitcoin drops to $1, I'm going to buy as much as I can. If Bitcoin drops to $10, $1,000, $10,000, I'm going to buy as much as I can. Even now, even at $100,000, I'm buying as much as I can because I know that there's no ceiling. With altcoins, they don't know what the ceiling is. They have no idea. They just don't want to be dumped on by the other creators. That's pretty much it on their end. And again, that's what differentiates it for me personally. I think that a lot of people who are in Bitcoin see Bitcoin as that ultimate asset that they're going to retire with, and they're going to keep saving in it until it's being used as money. They're not going to exchange it for dollars. They're going to exchange it for goods and services. That's the point of money. Like you said, you can use Bitcoin without the dollar existing, but you can't really use these other cryptocurrencies. I've never seen somebody accepting Ethereum. I've never seen somebody accepting XRP. I've seen people accepting Bitcoin though. And over time, that acceptance is just going to get better and better as the technology improves, as more people want Bitcoin, as more people hold Bitcoin. It's just going to get more and more widely accepted that Bitcoin is money, that we all want Bitcoin. At some point, the way that I see it, at some point, nobody's going to want dollars for Bitcoin because dollars can be created out of nothing. Bitcoin can't.
Yeah. It really is. It's remarkable to see that. And, I think about all the different, coins, and again, being just a recreation of this system we're in, and thinking that it's different. And there's so many layers that go into it, right? And I think that's what's so hard to explain to the average person. It's hard to explain to a lot of people in crypto. I mean, you have to have layers and layers and layers of knowledge of again, like it's whatever objection comes at you, it's you can see like, oh, you just haven't got to that next layer of study yet. And it's not to say it's not a cocky thing to say. It's that we've all been there. We've all had these objections.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, hey, the study just needs to be a bit more, whether it's the environmental thing or whatever it is. And it's always this objection. It's like, you're not quite there yet. Like it's the divisible thing. Like there's an inflation rate of Bitcoin, like all these things over and over again. So I think that's what's really, really fascinating. And I don't know if it was you or Pierre Rochard or somebody just in the last couple of weeks. I thought it was a great tweet. It was, like, again, just look at your enemies. Like, are any of the enemy countries that we have, or at least theoretically enemy countries of the US, are they buying XRP? Are they buying Ethereum? Like, come on, like, and that tells you what you need to know at the end of the day. So again, I will say this too, and I would love to know your thoughts on this. I'm a free market guy. Like that's the thing. Like we're not in this fight together, Bitcoin and crypto, because Bitcoin needs to win. If you want to go gamble on whatever, I don't care. If you want to go to the casino, if you want to go gamble on altcoins, I don't care. However, let's fix the monetary system first, then go have fun, have at it. Like I don't care, but let's not put the cart before the horse. Is that kind of how you feel?
Yeah, I'm not against people buying all these random altcoins. I think they have to get it out of their system. If they're going to gamble, they're going to gamble. You can't stop them.
Yeah.
For example, I was a gambler before. I used to buy random options of companies that I didn't understand, lost a lot of money. But over time, I figured out how Bitcoin works and why Bitcoin is the ultimate savings tool, why you should save in Bitcoin over the long term. I think a lot of people, they see money as just something that they need to transfer from place to place. They need to transfer it. Let's say, for example, they need to pay for whatever they need to pay for. So they'll give you all these benefits of random chains, like they're faster or they're cheaper. I don't care about cheaper. If I want it cheaper, I'll just use my Visa card. I don't have to pay a fee to use my Visa. I know the merchant has to pay the fee, but why would I want to go to some random cryptocurrency that isn't that much better than the current financial system, that isn't as highly as widely adopted, that can be created out of nothing, that can't be used as money. Nobody wants to use it as money yet. At least there are some people who want to use Bitcoin as money. There is nobody who wants to use all these random altcoins as money. All of these random altcoins are, at least in my opinion, they're just looking for exit liquidity. That's literally it. And back to what you were saying about free markets, that's how free markets work, right? The free market is designed to have people who have an information asymmetry. Let's say, for example, XRP's leadership team, they have an information asymmetry. They know that the ledger is missing. They know that they don't even have a complete ledger. And to me, that's so funny. The fact that they have this massive accounting error and people think that it's going to be the global reserve currency, that the level of stupidity doesn't even make any sense, to be honest. But when I point it out, they argue with me. They tell me, "Hey, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Who's Satoshi Nakamoto?" It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who Satoshi Nakamoto is, because the network works. If Ripple were to disappear, XRP wouldn't work anymore, because there's nobody marketing XRP. There's nobody posting about buying XRP. I actually see regularly. I see ads from Ripple or whoever it is, whoever's controlling the account. They're regularly posting, we're doing an airdrop, or we're doing this, or we're doing that. If you didn't get it for free, then you wouldn't be doing airdrops in the first place.
How many influencers are they paying, right? Like how many influencers are these centralized entities paying to shill their coins? I mean, we have no idea to know that. It's exactly. It's so wild. Like the free market. So one of the best things too is you always get this, it's a free market. Like just let the free market decide, guys. I thought you were free market. It's like, yeah, the free market, I'm allowed to sit here with Rajat and tell people the ills of what you're investing in and what you're telling other people to invest in. That's part of the free market. I am a part of the free market. I am the free market. Like exactly. Rajat is the free market, and we're doing what's in our best incentive for not only us, but for everyone around us to get on this free permissionless monetary standard, and then go have fun, have at it. But this is the free market. Welcome to it. So it's very interesting.
I actually think, if anything, Bitcoiners are very selfless, because let's say, for example,
that's all I've seen.
If nobody had, if those books behind you, the bullish case for Bitcoin, the price of tomorrow, if Saifedean hadn't written his book, if all these books hadn't been written, then I wouldn't have understood Bitcoin at all. And Bitcoin's price probably wouldn't have increased. And those people that wrote those books would have been able to accumulate more and more Bitcoin. I think Andreas Antonopoulos gave away thousands of Bitcoin in total,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. I don't remember the exact number, but he was mentioning it in a podcast. He was saying how he gave away thousands of Bitcoin, and he knew where this was going a decade
Yep.
ago, more than a decade ago. He knew where, like, you can see videos of him like 9 to 11 years ago, something like that. But he knew where this was going. He was predicting that it's going to millions of dollars. So why would he give away all these Bitcoin if he was being being selfish? It's completely selfless. Even, for example, your podcast, my content, we're putting time into creating this content, helping other people to understand what Bitcoin is and why they should own it. It's not like we're selling. I
Right.
haven't sold any. I sold a little bit of Bitcoin. So, for example, I had to buy a mic. I didn't have enough cash at the time. I didn't want to use my credit card.
Minor
I bought
detail.
a mic.
Yeah.
It was just an investment for me, basically. So I sold some
Right.
Bitcoin. But let's say, for example, I sold $300 worth of Bitcoin. I don't need exit liquidity. I don't need to convince somebody to buy that
Right.
$300 worth of Bitcoin, right? Somebody's going to buy it regardless. So
Yes.
with all these other cryptocurrencies, it's not a selfless act. It's a very selfish act, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to buy their cryptocurrency. They're trying to create a floor price for their cryptocurrency so they can dump into it. And that's what differentiates it. Like I said, with Bitcoin, it's very selfless, because if, let's say, Saifedean hadn't written his book, how many people wouldn't have been orange pilled? He would have just been able to
Yep.
buy Bitcoin for $100, $200, $500. He could have just stayed in his lane, kept doing what he does before. He was a professor, I think he was. So he could have kept teaching, and he could have kept accumulating Bitcoin. But it worked out for him because now he has the best-selling book in the world. I don't think that the book was written with the intention of being the best-selling
Right.
economics finance book in the world, but it worked out for him because he was selfless. He was offering so much value to the people who want to read his books, and it's always going to work out for people who are truly adding value to the economy.
Yeah. And it's funny. Again, it goes back to, makes me think of, are your enemies purchasing these altcoins? You know, like, are enemies purchasing these scams or affinity coins?
Yeah.
Are they? How many XRP books are written out there? Right. Like, you can take all these things in the margin, and it gives you the answer you're looking for. Right. Like, triangulating truth.
Yeah.
Like, how many are my enemies doing it? Are there books on it? You know, are there people like you said, you go into chat rooms, you can go into videos. How are they talking about it? Are they talking about, hey, we're going to change the world and we're bettering our life with our nutrition, sleep patterns? Or is it like, hey, where's my exit liquidity? Right. It's very obvious once you start looking at these things. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's brilliant.
That's it.
Yeah. Do you, one of my, I just went back and started reading the Fidelity little reports they put out a couple of years ago, and they're so good. I haven't read them in like 3 years, and like Bitcoin first, and then the, oh my gosh, Bitcoin first, and I forget the other one now. I don't know why, but those are so good. I don't know if you read though, but they go through like the blockchain, the trilemma, everything. And again, like you go through and you start seeing the importance of what Bitcoin is versus all these other things. And pretty much every other coin they were creating this attack surface that would be captured at some point because they chose to trade off, you know, either decentralization or security for that scalability quotient in some way or another. That's something, you know, for those who don't know, obviously those are the three: scalability, decentralization, and security. So Bitcoin chose decentralization and security, where all these others are trying to, hey, like you said, how can we be a faster version of this? Or what can we do here to kind of make it a little different? But then it increases the attack surface. Are there any, in saying all that, are there anything, what are the big things that really you've kind of relied on, or that, you know, orange pilled you, or was it big reports? Was it listening to certain people? What were some of the things that really helped you kind of have those aha moments?
So there was actually I watched a socialist video about real estate and landlords, and how landlords are terrible. It's so crazy. Like, I don't think most socialists even get what Bitcoin is. But that's the thing about Bitcoin. It's all these different things coming together,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't really understand it by just looking at one part of it. You need to look at it from different angles. So there was a socialist video. He was talking about how landlords buy real estate. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that, but they don't really do anything after. So they buy the real estate and they pay somebody, and they're just getting cash flows. They're really not adding anything to the society. They bought this property that's already been built. They're just taking it out of the market, and now everybody has to pay them for it. So that kind of got me to start thinking about the real estate side of things a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more. Um, there was definitely Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor was definitely a part of it.
Mm.
I saw on somebody's story they mentioned the Bitcoin standard. I thought that was a great great book. I think that was the only issue with the Bitcoin Standard is because I started reading it so early in my journey, it gave me more questions than it gave me answers. Because in the beginning, you're always going to be confused. Every topic is going to be very confusing. You might think that you know everything, but you're going to, if you do a really deep dive, you're going to have more and more questions. So that's what happened with the Bitcoin Standard. I thought the Bitcoin Standard was really great. I've actually listened to the audiobook maybe 5 times, and every time I pick up something new, which is amazing to me because it just means that I'm progressing in my understanding of where Bitcoin is going. So the Bitcoin Standard, that socialist video that I was talking about, Michael Saylor definitely was a huge impact. He had a huge impact on my knowledge. He every time he answers a question, he answers it with some kind of story that makes it hit harder. I don't know how to describe it, but he's so great with giving his examples, with giving his stories. So definitely listen to some of his podcasts. And I think something that really helped me was listening to debates between, let's say, gold bugs and Bitcoiners. That really helped me because when you listen to somebody arguing for the asset that they've been raised to understand, a lot of, let's say, for example, Peter Schiff. I read I watched a video between Peter Schiff and I don't remember who it was. There's quite a few of them actually. Even with Robert Breedlove, he had one recently with Robert Breedlove. But every time he gives you an argument, you can tell that he hasn't done the deep research. Just right off the bat, you can tell that when he says, "Oh, Bitcoin can be replicated," he doesn't quite understand that the replicated, the copy of Bitcoin isn't real. It's not. It's like if somebody created fake, like it's pyrite versus gold. If somebody gave you fake pirates, if somebody gave you fool's gold versus real gold, you may not be able to tell, but you know what the differences are. You know that there are differences. Nobody wants fool's gold. So pyrite is that material. It looks like gold, but it's not actual gold. It doesn't have all the characteristics of gold. So if somebody gives you pyrite, you're going to feel like you're screwed over. It's exactly the same thing. If somebody gave me Ethereum when I asked them for Bitcoin, I'm going to feel stupid because Ethereum is not Bitcoin. Ethereum is completely different. It's a completely different chain. So when you listen to a lot of these gold bugs talking about Bitcoin, you can tell that there's a massive gap in their knowledge and they don't quite understand what Bitcoin is. They have this view of the world being on a gold standard and they think that we're going to continue on that gold standard, but they haven't looked at the alternatives. So that really helped me because I think it solidified my arguments. Because when you talk to somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about, you can easily pick apart their arguments. It really helped me to see that. And watching people like Robert Breedlove completely dismantle everything that Peter Schiff says, it's just awesome to me because it gives me more and more of an understanding of what I'm fighting for, what I'm looking at, what I'm teaching other people about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Rajat, honestly. Like that, the Saylor stuff, so two things that orange pilled me a ton were years ago, Max Kaiser talking about holding Bitcoin in your head. That was a mind blower for me. I don't know when that was. I was telling you offline, like 2016, 17, 18, somewhere in there. And then the Saylor series in 2020, when the lockdowns were happening, really solidified. That's when I sold my real estate business, all that, and really was like, hey, I'm going into Bitcoin full time. But the other thing was seeing the log chart as well, and seeing this when you're in linear, it just looks like, oh, things are crashing up and down against the dollar, and then the log chart, you realize, oh, it's just mathematically up and to the right. It's just mathematically programmed to keep doing this because it's a network effect. So those were like the three, the big things to me. But I would love for you to just touch on even the first part of that, which is like holding the asset in your head. And people, this really trips people up. But you're talking about Breedlove, talking about Saylor, these talks, most of what make me think of it is you like, I didn't understand custody and really an asset in general until I hit Robert Kiyosaki 15 years ago. Like, asset pays you, it's got to pay you, right? And like how backward society was, but that was still in a fiat system. But then when you advance to the Bitcoin stage, you start seeing everything in a clear picture finally, and you see that I don't own anything actually. Like even the real estate, like I own real estate. We talked about you with real estate. You see these things and you're like, wait, I don't actually own it because I'm paying property taxes. Like they could just strip it away from me, or they could, if I have gold, they could beat me over the head and they could take it from me or whatever it is. But every asset, if they can lodge you away from that, or, divest that from you somehow, or eminent domain or whatever it is, you don't own it. And so self-custody to me, and being able to hold that in your head, those words, and a few words, memorize them, you can go anywhere in the world. Those were just game changers. And you start realizing this is different than anything we've ever seen. So I would love for you to kind of touch on some of those aspects and just your journey of just the importance of that.
Yeah, it's actually crazy to me the fact that you can write down 12 words and you can carry those words wherever you want to, or you can memorize them. You can carry them wherever you want to, and nobody can stop you. So I used to work at a brokerage. I used to work at a self-directed brokerage, so people were trading in and out of stocks whenever they wanted to, and sometimes people would want to take self custody of their stocks, so they would want to take a stock certificate. So the bank that I worked at, we would ship them a stock certificate, and it was actually crazy to me that if somebody wants to take self custody of a stock, no matter how much stock they have, the minimum cost was like $300 to write
Jeez.
to print out a stock certificate. Because what they would have to do is they'd have to go to the I don't remember what it's called, but it's called
Wow.
DTCC or something, like the clearinghouse. They'd have to get permission from them. They'd have to move the asset from their name to the customer's name. It was a massive process. So I think the $300 was just a way for them to deter people from doing it.
Yeah.
But to me, that was just crazy. Like, if you want, you're paying for this thing. It's like going to a grocery store and then buying food and then just leaving it there, just letting them keep it for you. It doesn't really make any sense. So that's how that was my experience, and it didn't really click to me that that was weird until I came across Bitcoin, because with Bitcoin anybody can take self custody. With the legacy financial markets, if everybody was taking self custody, it wouldn't work, because let's say, for example, I own stock certificates and I want to sell my shares. I have to go to the bank and I have to wait until they're open. Then I have to wait until the markets are open. I have to do all this stuff. They have to verify that I actually own those stocks. They have to do all of this stuff to make sure that I actually own it. And for me to trade that stock would be next to impossible. You can't trade. We need centralization in the legacy financial system in order to be able to properly trade. We need to trust certain entities. If we can't trust entities, then there's no way of trading. Think about how cumbersome and how difficult it would be if you wanted to trade stocks and every time you wanted to trade them, you'd have to go into the exchange, you have to go into a bank, you have to give them a physical stock certificate. Imagine how difficult that would be. It would stop everybody from trading. There would be no trading. There would be no free market. People wouldn't be trading like that. People would probably be trading amongst themselves. People wouldn't even want to own stocks at that point. I think it would be so difficult that people wouldn't even want to own them. But with Bitcoin, it's completely different. You can take full self custody. Let's say, for example, if I buy Bitcoin from an exchange, I can get them to transfer to my wallet 10 minutes. Maybe they'll take an hour, maybe they'll take a day, whatever. But once I have it, I can do whatever I want with it. I can send it to you. I can send it to my friend. I can send it to a merchant in Tokyo. I can send it to a merchant in India. I can do whatever I want with it. At that point, because it's digital money, it differentiates it from the entire financial system. So back to what you were saying about how you can store your Bitcoin in your head. 12 words, that's all you need. You memorize those 12 words, you have access to your Bitcoin from anywhere in the world. You can't do that with real estate. Let's say, for example, if your government wants to take your property, you can't carry it anywhere with you. How are you going to take your property to, let's say, for example, all the people in Gaza, all the people in other countries, Ukraine, for example. Ukraine people are getting bombed. They have all of their money tied up in these properties. They can't do anything with it. There's literally nothing they can do. But on the other hand, with Bitcoin, they can go from place to place. They can leave their country. They can leave their city. They can do whatever they want with it as long as they have those 12 words memorized. Even if they write down those 12 words, they can carry those around with them as well. They can have a hardware wallet. So all you're doing is when you take Bitcoin into self custody, all you're doing is you're taking Bitcoin into a wallet into an address that you control, that you have the private keys for, and you can do whatever you want with it. You can carry it wherever you want to. There's no physical appearance of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is all digital. So no matter what happens, as long as you have the password to access your Bitcoin, you can move it wherever you want to. Completely different with the legacy financial system. In the legacy financial system, we have to trust somebody. With Bitcoin, trust is you have to trust people at some point. If we want to scale up, for example, let's say we want to use Lightning, you have to trust whoever starts that Lightning channel. I don't know the exact details, but you have to trust people if you want to scale up. But on the base layer, you don't have to trust anybody. You trust yourself. You keep your own keys. You can run your own node. You can do whatever you want to. So that completely differentiates Bitcoin from everything else. Like with stocks, you can't take self custody even if you wanted to.
Yeah, it really is a game changer when someone sees that. It's wild.
Yeah.
And the two things that I remember the other one, and I'll link to those here along with Rajat's stuff as well, obviously. But Bitcoin First and Valuing Bitcoin, those are the Fidelity papers like 3 or 4
Oh,
years ago that are really good. They're like 20-30 page research papers that Fidelity Digital Assets did. Really, really good. And they go through all this stuff, like the blockchain trilemma and all these and graphs and charts. They're phenomenal. The, so in saying that, will people like the thing that I in a way is concerning, like all the technical stuff doesn't concern me at all about Bitcoin. And in the beginning, like again, we said everyone goes through the gauntlet. You're learning about it, objections here, but the technology at this point doesn't concern me at all. And this goes to Saylor. I heard a few years ago Saylor say his concern with Bitcoin was this for George Gammon, who again, George Gammon, I was someone I followed for a while, and George he's coming back this way. Like he gets it. He almost gets Bitcoin. He's right there, but he just doesn't believe humans will care necessarily enough about sound money. And that's Saylor's fear actually as well, coming from two different angles a little bit in a way, to people that have some different thoughts on how the world plays out. But like even now, like the system, most people have no idea clearly how the monetary system works, or else was it Henry Ford or forget who it was now with the quote of like or Keynes or the revolution in the morning, if people understood how the monetary system worked, right? So people now, is it just going to be a couple percent of us that are dragging everyone else, humanity, across the finish line? I think of the Revolutionary War. I talk about this a lot, and I'm sure the people have maybe heard me say that listen in, just the 3% were the ones who fought the Revolutionary War, basically, at least in the beginning. And they dragged a few more people in over time. And most people were like, we're good. Like, we're British, we're Tories, we're British loyalists. They're whatever. They're tattling on the Patriots next door. And they're like, oh yeah, they're in there. And most people, they got the victory though. Like they got the freedom because a couple percent said, I'm not taking this crap anymore. Like, is there anything that kind of scares you in that sense? Like, to me, that's the only thing I can think of. It's just like people just don't care enough, and like Bitcoiners are the bad people. They're trying to fix, change the system, and they're too wealthy now. Like, what is it that kind of like leaves you, asleep at night, and you think about like, this is going to be interesting how this plays out?
I think people don't want a solution. I think they just want to complain about certain problems. Like they just want to be able to complain, because you can have people who are struggling financially and they're spending their money stupidly. They're just buying things that they don't need, but they can't pay for rent. They can't pay for their debts. They're carrying credit card debt. And like I said, I don't think people want a solution. I think people are just going to be forced into it over time. Bitcoin's just going to get better. I think there's no way of avoiding Bitcoin at this point. I don't really think that I'm scared. I'm not scared of any of that kind of stuff. I don't really think that if somebody is going to complain about Bitcoin, if they don't understand it, that it's going to fail because of that. I think a very small portion of people can definitely carry us across the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
My personal goal, but with my content, I'm sure your goal is the same thing. With our content, what we're trying to do is we're trying to inform as many people as possible. So when we do get to the finish line, there's as many people who can become wealthy with us as possible. Like, for example, there are people who have bought more Bitcoin that I can imagine buying in my own life based on my content. Like there was a guy who I spoke to, he bought, I think it was 100 Bitcoin after watching my content. And it was just absolutely insane. I'm never going to be able to get 100 Bitcoin. That's not even something I can imagine. Yep. But the person who watched my content, he was able to benefit with 100 Bitcoin. To me, that's crazy. I think those people are going to be the ones that carry us across the finish line. The people who actually listen, the people who actually learn. Everybody else, I mean, they're uninformed. Their opinions really won't matter at a point. At a point, if you're a merchant, if your employer is paying you in Bitcoin, you don't have a choice. Either you get paid or you don't get paid. They find another employee. And that's just something that's going to happen. If people don't want to get paid in Bitcoin, they're just getting paid in an inferior money, like the dollar, for example. You can keep getting paid in the dollar, perfectly fine. If you don't want to fight for yourself, you're kind of putting yourself in this position where you're going to get worse off over time. If people don't want to interact with Bitcoin, I'm not worried about it, because I know for a fact that there will be somebody who's willing to exchange Bitcoin for goods and services at some point in the future. I will be able to find someone, let's say, for example, worst case, if the dollar survives, there will definitely be someone who's willing to give me dollars in exchange for my Bitcoin at some point. Doesn't matter when, 10, 20, 100 years from now, if I'm alive, somebody will be willing to take my Bitcoin in exchange for dollars, because Bitcoin is that finite good. Over time, I do think that people are going to change their minds. They're going to figure out what this thing is. They're going to realize that with Bitcoin, they can improve their lifestyle. They can improve their standard of living. So why would they want to continue saving in dollars? I think it'll just be people will just get it at some point, and if they don't, they're going to be forced into it. So I don't really see that as a problem. I think the one thing that really scares me about Bitcoin is the potential that it could become more and more centralized. Like the people who own Bitcoin today, they're probably not going to sell the majority of it for a very, very long time or ever. Let's say you have MicroStrategy, they have 500,000 Bitcoin. You have BlackRock, they have about 600,000 Bitcoin at the time of this recording, about 600,000. Those Bitcoin are never going to go back into the market. So what scares me is that the people at the bottom are going to be fighting for scraps. They're going to be basically fighting for nothing. They're going to be fighting for 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 Satoshis, and that's all they'll be able to afford. And that's what really gets me, and that's what's going to impact people and make people not like Bitcoin, I guess, in a way. But I mean, those people are always going to be there. There's always going to be the people at the bottom. There's always going to be the people at the top. There's going to be people who own 0.1 Bitcoin, and there's going to be other people who own 0.000001. And that's always going to happen. I don't think that's avoidable, but that's what scares me the most. I don't really think that people are going to continue to reject Bitcoin over time once they see where Bitcoin is going. Once Bitcoin is at $1 million, I think it'll open up a lot of eyes. Once Bitcoin is at $10 million, I think it'll open up a lot of eyes. Fidelity, the report that you're talking about, I think they predicted Bitcoin to go to $1 billion by 2040, which to me is just insane. People think that I'm crazy when I say Bitcoin's going to eventually go to $1 million. Fidelity, this massive institution, is telling you that Bitcoin is going to $1 billion, and you're still questioning it. Like, at that point, if people are still questioning it, they kind of deserve to be to not have the Bitcoin that they should be getting. It goes back to the price. Bitcoin, you buy Bitcoin at the price you
Free
deserve.
Market. Yep.
If you, it's the free market, exactly. You buy Bitcoin at the price you deserve. If you're going to ignore it, then you're going to buy it later. I think there are some nuances there, of course, where, let's say, if somebody's not born yet, or if somebody's they're not going to be able to buy Bitcoin, of course. But the way that I see it, it's based on whenever you first discover Bitcoin and in the future. So let's say, for example, for me, I first really started looking at Bitcoin at around $3,000. My colleague told me about Bitcoin at around 3,000 or 4,000. I don't remember what the number was. 2020. I thought it was going to go down. So I personally bought Bitcoin at the price I deserved. I didn't get to buy at 3,000 or 4,000 because I hadn't done the education. Before that, there was no control. I had no control over, let's say, when Bitcoin was a cent, 2 cents, 5 cents, 10 cents. I had no control over that. I had control at the point where I discovered Bitcoin at $3,000, $4,000, and I chose to ignore it. So today, people have this option to buy Bitcoin at 100K, and they're choosing to ignore it. Who can they blame for that? They're putting themselves in that position where they can't afford it. They're putting themselves in that position where they won't even be able to buy 100,000 Satoshis, for example. At some point, that 100,000 Satoshis is going to be a massive bag, but they're losing out on the opportunity because some of them have an ego. Some of them just don't want to. They think that it's worthless. They want to stick to the current financial system. So I think it'll be up to them, up to the people who are adopting it. It'll be up to them to actually adopt. Nobody can. It doesn't really worry me, to be honest. If it was in my hands, I would actually distribute as much Bitcoin as I could to as many people as possible. But I don't have enough Bitcoin to help everybody. So
yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier, that it's selflessness. You know, a lot of what you just said, you can tell like that's who you are innately. I mean, a lot of it you can't help yourself. I mean, you're talking very selflessly, and it makes me think of Bitcoin being a humility test. It's not. I don't look at it as, it's not an IQ test, right? Like there's some of the smartest people in the world we know that are in Bitcoin. There's some of the least smartest in the world that are in Bitcoin. It's just humility. Like you said, when you see it, do you allow yourself to say, maybe there's something I'm missing here? And do you go in and put that work in? That's the only thing that separates people to understand. And again, it's not just Bitcoin. Bitcoin's a 4-letter word. I mean, it's not Bitcoin. It's sound money. Do I understand the system I am living in? Or am I just going to accept blindly that this is the way it's been, so I'm just going to continue this way? That to me is just, wild. And in saying that too, your point of, life, the beautiful part of someone that's born 10 years from now, 20 years from now, they will they will be in a world that has much less societal decay, right? And hopefully less
Yeah.
homelessness. And like these things will happen because we're on a Bitcoin standard. Maybe they don't have the Bitcoin someone got when they were alive in 2015, if they're born in 2035. But guess what? You get the benefits, just like we said, America, like 3% of the guys won the Revolutionary War, but then you got the Bill of Rights. You got all these things and you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So that's the world I think that it doesn't get talked about enough in a way. We don't kind of project that into the world enough. Like, why are we fighting for it? And we get lumped into that crypto crowd of, like you alluded to earlier, of like, this pumping your bags and like, what is it? So anyway, I would love for you to kind of touch on any of that, but I'd also love for you to, we talked these high numbers. How do you fight unit cost bias when people are talking to you or asking you about that?
I just try to tell them that you can buy as much as you want to. If you want to buy $1's worth, you can. You don't need a whole Bitcoin. There are only 21 million. 99.9% of the world won't be able to afford one whole Bitcoin, regardless of what happens. But you can afford 0.1 Bitcoin. You can afford 0.01 Bitcoin. You can afford 0.005 Bitcoin, 500,000 Satoshis. So each of these Bitcoin can be split into 100 million units. You can buy any number of those units if you want to. For example, $1 is worth 1,000 Satoshis or so. $1 is worth like 700 Satoshis. So if you have $1 a month, put $1 a month into it. It's that simple. If you don't want to buy any amount of Bitcoin, it's up to you. You have the chance, but most people are just ignoring it because they think it's going nowhere. Keep in mind that I think I'm pretty radical in saying that Bitcoin is going to $1 million. It's going to $10 million because 99.9% of the world doesn't see that. They don't get it. They don't understand it. Even I think the majority of people who own Bitcoin, they don't quite understand it because they haven't put in the time. They got lucky. A lot of people who own Bitcoin, they're going to dump over the coming years because they don't quite understand what it is. They're going to dump it for dollars. And I think institutions are going to be a part of that. They're going to be the reason for that. I personally think, the way that I see it, institutions are going to bump the price up to price out anybody who can't afford it. So, to price out anybody who hasn't bought yet. So what they're going to do is they're going to offer more and more dollars because they can. Dollars can be created out of nothing. They're going to offer more and more dollars, and no matter how many dollars they offer, it's not going to be enough because dollars can be created out of nothing. They're just going to bump that price up, and anybody who's being paid in dollars is not going to be able to afford that amount of Bitcoin anymore. So let's say, for example, if you can afford 0.1 Bitcoin today, at some point you won't be able to afford that anymore. You'll be priced out. You'll be able to afford 0.05. And then at some point, 5 million Satoshis. 0.05 is 5 million Satoshis. So at some point, you'll be priced out of 5 million Satoshis. And then at some point, you'll be priced out of 1 million Satoshis. If we go back to the beginning of Bitcoin, we know that at some point, you could buy something like 100 Bitcoin for $1, which is absolutely insane. But once that supply ran out, once the number of people who were willing to sell Bitcoin for that price ran out, we never went back to that price again because Bitcoin is finite. So the people who own Bitcoin, they have a finite amount. They can sell into the market. They can only impact the market to a certain extent. Let's say, for example, Germany. Germany sold, 50,000 Bitcoin for like 53, 54K. Once they sold, they're out. They can't sell anymore. You can't just keep creating more and more Bitcoin and dumping it on the market. On the other hand, that's how the US dollar works.
If you're liking this interview, but you're just wondering, hey, you know what, Brandon, this is amazing stuff. And I get you have these guests on and they're talking about how orange pilling the world is so great and how Bitcoin is going to take over the world. How in the world do I educate my family and friends? How do I get people to understand what most people just don't care about, quite honestly? Bitcoin trading cards is the way to do that. When you open up these cards, you see the foil cards, you see the chase, you see the glossy cards, young, old, boy, girl, man, woman, it doesn't matter. People love these cards. It's awesome because they're super valuable, by the way. Amazing little side note. However, it Trojan horses them into the most important thing of the day. It's not politics. It's not all the things that we fight about. It's changing the money, fix the world. Bitcoin trading cards is the best way that we have going in order to do that, no matter who you are. You're going to love them. Playable Characters 10 for 10% off at checkout. Playable Characters 10 off at checkout. btc-tc.com. You're going to absolutely love these things. Now back to the show.
When there's demand for the US dollar, when the purchasing power of the US dollar increases, the Federal Reserve wants inflation. The Federal Reserve will print more, and it'll tell banks to issue more dollars. More people will go into banks and they'll take on loans, and they'll bring that value of the dollar back down. There's an intent there of bringing the value of the dollar down. On the other hand, with Bitcoin, nobody can do that. If you have Bitcoin, you have a finite amount of Bitcoin. Once you sell it, it's gone. You're probably going to be paying a lot more to get it back. And I think that's the difference here. So the people who think, oh, I can't afford one Bitcoin, I can't afford 10 Bitcoin, I can't afford 1,000 Bitcoins, I'm going to buy this random altcoin because for this altcoin, I can buy thousands. Why wouldn't I want thousands of this random altcoin? They're going to miss out. I think those are lessons that you're going to have to go through. It's like buying a penny stock. For example, when
Mm-hmm.
I was first into stocks, when I first got into stocks, I was buying random penny stocks because I saw Apple at like $500 before the split that happened. I think now that's probably worth like 25, 3,000, $4,000 or whatever. But I ignored it because I saw these other penny stocks that were much cheaper. I thought that those penny stocks had more potential because Apple had already grown so much. Of course, I got burned. I think for a lot of people, they're going to have to go through those lessons. They're going to have to see their portfolio go to zero for them to really learn that lesson. And who knows, at that time, maybe they'll be able to afford a tenth of the Bitcoin they can afford today.
Yeah, boy, it's a very sobering thought. How do you how do you explain money to people? Like, when you have people, friends, family, whoever, what is your explanation of money to them? And because it's really the genesis of all this, right? In the
Yeah.
underlying, because in the context of where I'm going with this too, I think that people I was just talking to someone over the holidays a month ago, and they were confusing inflation with capitalism, and they kept thinking like, well, like inflation is just part of capital. Like, what do you mean? Like deflation is going to kill the world? Is we're going to be in famine and all? And I was like, no. Like you're conflating things. Like the monetary layer is the bedrock. It sits underneath the economics. The economic system's up here, and then your monetary layer is down here. They're separate things. And I think so
Yeah.
much of society has them like they're together, and it's just like that's just so. How do you kind of see all that, and how do you explain the system, I guess, and how it works? What is money?
So I had one of my sister-in-laws actually asked me that question. She said, "Hey, why do you think Bitcoin is going to go up?" So I tried to explain to her why the current financial system is corrupt. So I had a $20 bill in my pocket, and I showed it to her. I said, "Hey, you know that governments can print this. They can create as many of these as they want to." And she said, "Oh, I didn't know that they print money. I didn't know they could create as much of it as they want to." So I told her, yeah, that's what's happening. She's a nurse, so she gives away her time,
Mm-hmm.
effort, energy to help other people. She spends a lot of time at work. Of course, nurses have 12-hour shifts.
Yeah.
They work 3-4 days a week, so they're working a lot. And I told her, you're sacrificing all of this time that's finite, that you're never going to get back, and you're getting back these things that somebody else can print. Why would you give up your hobbies? Why would you give up your time with your kid? Why would you give up time with your family in order to pursue this thing that somebody else can print? I think that I don't know if it really clicked for her, but I think that really helps to put into perspective for a lot of people because they spend the majority of their time working for money. They spend the majority of their time trying to make money. And most of these people aren't where they want to be in life because the money that they have is being printed out of nothing. More and more dollars are being added to the economy. So what's happening is they're saving, they're putting in their time, they're doing everything right. They're spending less than they earn. They're doing everything right. Um, they're putting their savings in a bank account. They're making the right decisions. They're delaying gratification. They're not getting instant gratification. But at the same time, they're getting screwed over because more and more of those dollars are being printed. So they have these. Let's say you have $100,000 in your bank account. If your government goes and prints more, maybe you'll lose $5,000 worth of purchasing power in a year. Then if your government prints more, maybe you'll lose another $10,000, then another $20,000. In 30 years, your $100,000 is probably going to buy $20,000 worth of goods. And that's not because of corporate greed. That's not because of capitalism. That's not because the people who are producing those things are greedy. It's because they understand that the amount of money in the system is increasing. They see the raw materials that they're putting in. They see the inputs of whatever they're producing. Let's say, for example, a farmer. Farmers have to pay for certain things. They have to pay for seeds. They have to pay. I don't even know what the costs are. They have to maintain their equipment. They have to do all this stuff. They have to pay rent. They have to pay property tax. If their costs are going up, they have to pass that cost on to the customers. If they can't pass that cost on to the customers, they're going to go bankrupt. So what's happening here is as more and more dollars are printed, the raw materials that they need are being chased by more and more dollars. So if more and more dollars are chasing those raw materials, the price is going to go up because those raw materials are finite while the dollars are infinite. More and more dollars can be created, added to the economy, and used to spend on whatever they want to. And think about it, we're at the highest debt levels that we've ever been. The US government is $36 trillion in debt. They have $36 trillion of debt. They're supposed to be the ones who enforce the use of this currency, but they're shorting it. So just that, it shows you that this entire system it's broken. It doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Even the people who are supposed to be enforcing this currency don't want it. Americans don't want the US dollar. They want other people to store their value in US dollars, but they don't want US dollars themselves. They want to borrow US dollars and they want to buy whatever they can. So when you look at it from that perspective, it just shows you the entire system is broken. Even the Canadian dollar, same thing. People borrow as many Canadian dollars as they want to. They go to a bank, they want to buy a house for $10 million. They'll borrow $8 million and the bank will just create it out of nothing. And then they rent out that house to somebody who's actually working a job. It's completely corrupt. It's a completely messed up system. They're using money that they borrowed that was created out of thin air. Then the bank is charging interest on this thing that they created out of thin air. And then the end user, the person who's actually living in that house that's been purchased with fake money, that person is the one who's breaking their back trying to work. And back to what I was talking about the nurse, about my sister-in-law, she is constantly seeing that her cost of living is going up, even though she's working harder. She's working harder than ever.
Providing
And I tried to
value.
explain,
Yeah.
and I tried to explain to her, it's not because you're doing the wrong things. It's because the money that you're using is broken. It doesn't work. It's money is supposed to have three functions. It's supposed to be a medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value. If you can't store value in money, then it's not money. Yep. The thing that we use today is a currency. We've been taught in school that we are using money. Everybody that I personally know thinks that dollar bills and coins are money. But the reality is that that's not money. That's currency. That's something that anybody can, not anybody, that's something that these banks can create more of whenever they want to. You're exchanging your finite resources for this thing that can be created out of nothing, that somebody else can print. It's an arbitrage opportunity for the person on the other end. They're basically extracting everything from you and they're benefiting from your hard work. So why would you continue to work for this piece of paper?
The one way, and I love that you just said that, because that's the way I always think about or try to explain to people, was you, like you just said, your finite time and energy you have. It's the only finite thing we ever really had for thousands of years. It was your time, and there was no way to really properly say that. Gold is the best thing we had. There's still a small inflation rate, mining rate, and you have this finite time and energy. You pour work, like you said, nurse, you pour work, you're at McDonald's, you're a doctor, whatever it is, and you're pouring your time and energy in there. And there's a little inflationary hole in the bucket, right? And you just go to sleep and you wake up and half of it was gone. Yeah. You're like, what is going on? But Bitcoin we finally found this finite container perfectly matched and equal to your finite time and energy, where it just stored it up and it didn't go anywhere. Like, it actually grew over time as you poured more work into it. And it was just like, you have to find the finite container for your finite time and energy. And right now, people are just trading finite time for infinite liabilities. Like you said, like they can just print it up in a basement out of nowhere, and we're wondering why we're getting poor. It's truly remarkable.
I like to think of Bitcoin, the token, as almost like the liability of the network, where the liabilities are only limited to a certain number, whereas in the current financial system, we are using liabilities. Like, I have $100 bill here. It says here, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. Federal Reserve note. This is debt.
Yep.
This we're using somebody else's debt as money.
Note. Yeah.
We're giving it to somebody else. So the way that I like to see it is, Bitcoin is the debt of the financial system, of the Bitcoin network. And there's only a limited number of Bitcoin that are available, while on the other hand, and there's an unlimited number of these available. So if these things are chasing the things that you want, and more of them are being printed, and there's literally an unlimited stream of these things that can buy whatever you want, then why would you save in them?
Wild. Makes no sense. I mean, really, people just don't even take the time for 2 seconds to step back and think about it. Yeah. So in saying all this, what was for those that don't know Rajat, he was a CFA and still is, I believe, correct? He's So you, a chartered financial analyst, and what was that world like? Like, how did they the people you're around, you have these, academic, elite mindsets, that world, whatever, call it Wall Street, like this financialized world. Did they know what money is? Like, what was this world like, and what was the response been with you kind of coming over to the dark side, I guess, so to speak, to the enlightened side?
Yeah,
And what has that been like?
that's a really good question. I think it was kind of weird because I never learned about what money is before I read the Bitcoin Standard. I didn't understand what money was, and it sounds
Mm-hmm.
kind of crazy because I spent uh, 20 years in school, then I went to university, then I spent another 3 years doing the CFA, and I didn't learn anything about how money works up until I completed the CFA in 2019. And until 2019, I had no idea what money works. It was, I don't know if you've heard that analogy where people say um, fish don't know what water is because they live in
Yeah.
it.
Oh, I
It's
love that.
always,
Yeah.
they're always surrounded by
That's
it.
all I know.
It's the same thing with money. We have no idea what money is. We just assume that it's going to be used for us to exchange for goods and services. People see that prices are going up. They think that the price of things are going up because of, like I said, corporate greed. They don't quite understand that the base layer, like you said, there's the economic layer, and then below that, there's the monetary layer. That monetary layer is built on dog shit. That's literally it.
I was gonna say sand, but I like that better.
It's built on nothing. It's built on nothing. Like it's
Oh
literally
man.
built on nothing, and it can break at any point. It can completely
Mm-hmm.
collapse at any point. If in the current financial system, if too many people can't pay off their debts, if they don't have enough cash flow to pay off their debts, then the entire system collapses. Even in the CFA, we had just assumed that the U.S. dollar is going to be there forever. We hadn't even thought about um, if you look at the curriculum, if you look at the content, we up until 2019 at least, I don't know what happened after that, but there was no there was no thought of the US dollar being replaced. And that's how the majority of people think. That's how the majority of people around me used to think. People saw yield, they saw bonds, they saw rental income, they saw dividends, and that was it. They didn't really think about what those dividends are. How are those dividends being created? How is that yield being generated? Where is that yield coming from? We didn't really think about how interest is like, let's say you put your money in a bank account, you just assume, oh, the bank is going to give me 4% interest. How is the bank making that money?
Right.
People don't even think of it that way.
No.
And I think that was partly what made me take so long to really understand what Bitcoin is. And I think this
Mm-hmm.
is what's going to happen with a lot of Wall Street as well. Because you're surrounded by all of this garbage, it's going to take you a long time to understand what Bitcoin is, because Bitcoin is the purest form of money. It's going to take a while to actually get over all of those random beliefs that you have, the things that you understand, that you think about. But once you actually get to that point, once you cross that, I guess, that chasm, you're probably, those Wall Street investors are probably going to be the most bullish Bitcoiners in the world, and they're never going to want to get rid of it. Like, for example, for me, it took me 3 years. People think, "Oh, what's wrong with this guy? He must be stupid. Why did it take him 3 years to understand this thing when it took me 6 months?" It was because I had all these beliefs. It's because I understood that the financial system worked the way it does. I I had already built my life
Mm-hmm.
around buying stocks. I had
Yeah.
already understood that stocks are where you should put your money. You should always buy investments. You should always put your money into businesses, because that's the way to generate more cash flow. But I hadn't really looked at what that cash flow is. And I think a lot of Wall Street, I'm in Canada, so I guess we call it Bay Street in our area. A lot of Bay Street doesn't quite understand it yet. And I think because Bitcoin has passed that $100,000 level, they're starting to see it. They're starting to do the dive. But I don't think they're going to get it for another 3, 4, 5 years. I think it's going to take them a lot of time, because they don't quite understand that the base layer of everything is corrupted. They don't understand that the base layer of everything is just completely broken. I know for a fact that a lot of CFAs have no idea what money is. If you're a CFA watching this video, I'm calling you out on this. You probably don't know what money is. You probably have no idea. You probably haven't put in the time, unless maybe you've been watching Brandon's content for a while. You probably have no idea what money is. You probably have no idea where money comes from. You probably have no idea that it's printed out of nothing. I personally didn't. I hadn't even thought of it from that perspective. I knew that it was being printed. I knew about monetary policy, economic policy, all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff, but I hadn't thought of it from first principles. And thinking of it from first principles is what really changes things.
That is so well said. It's funny because I've thought of first principles a few times, and I was forgetting to say it in a way. And throughout this pod here, and you just saying that just kind of sums a lot of it up beautifully. It really is first principles, and it goes back to like the altcoin stuff. It goes back to all these things. When you're not coming from, I always think of, I was telling my kids the other day, one of them told like a little lie or like a white lie. I can't remember exactly what it even was now. It was maybe a few months ago. And I just told them that it was like every time you tell a little lie, like again, it just gets easier to tell the next one, right? And it's like an analogy for life in a way, right? Where like the further you get away from truth, the harder it is. Like the more BS layers you have to get back through to get to the truth. And like you just made me think of that too. With like you already had a lot of these thoughts in your head. Like there's a lot of people that don't work in the financial, like maybe they're a nurse, like we were saying, or something else. They don't think about any of it. So maybe some of those people might get to Bitcoin quicker in a way because it's a humility test, not IQ. When you have all these stories and these things, hey, I'm in the financial world and I've got all these stories built up already. You have to go back through all this just to get to the truth again. So really fascinating. It's like, that's what's amazing about Bitcoin. There's like a trillion, there's unlimited analogies and things you can think of. It just opens up this new world to. By the way, did you see, there's this guy the other day, I don't remember who it is, and that's why I hesitate to bring it out because I don't have like a ton of information on it, but someone was just saying this. It was like an old central bank guy, and he just said something like, if Bitcoin wins, like Bitcoin's going to zero, it's like Uma or somebody, I forget what his name was, his old guy, and he's like, Bitcoin's going to zero in the next 5 or 10 years, and he's like, but if Bitcoin does win, then basically we have to rethink all of money, like we'll have to rethink all of our study. Did you see that?
I did. I don't know if it was a video, or I think I saw the tweet.
Yeah, it was like a tweet or something, or caption.
But that scares people, right? Because it just completely changes their beliefs of how the world works. Yes. People have this view of how the world should work, and they expect that it'll continue to work that way. They think, your savings should generate cash flow. But the reason why they expect that is because your savings are decreasing in value otherwise. If, let's say, for example, if you own real estate, your real estate has to generate cash flow because otherwise you won't be able to afford it. You have these ongoing costs, these maintenance costs. You have to pay for repairs. You have to pay for lawyers. You have to pay for realtors. So you have to generate cash flow with real estate. You have to generate cash flow with stocks because what else is a business there for? But people don't look at what that cash flow is. If you can just hold on to that cash flow, if you can just hold on to that money, if you can just hold on to the cash instead of having to invest in stocks, think about how much better the world will be. I think what it'll do is it'll give more people the opportunity to start businesses and to compete with the people who have these multinational mega corporations. And people haven't really thought of it that way. So
no, because you're right. I mean, like you think of all these companies, like a Fold, for example, who they have, just announced a couple months ago, there's 1,000 Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Oh, wow. It's already what, $100 million. I mean, they're going to be $1 billion company in the next, in short order, in essence. And they're going to be competing now against the likes of any other financial company or whatever it is. So that kind of stuff's going to continue going forward, and it's going to you're not going to be able to keep up with it if you're just on this fiat standard. Obviously, you're Bitcoiners. And I love that you said that too about yield, like yield, cash flow, dividends, the earnings, all this stuff is, again, like until you see Bitcoin, you don't get it. Cause again, I was that guy. I was real estate guy. I was like, cash flow. And you just realize you're on the Titanic and you're going down, and your Bitcoin helps you realize real estate might be one of the best things possibly on the fiat Titanic, but you're still going down. You're still gonna be at the bottom of the ocean. You might go in the water last, but you still aren't on the lifeboat because the whole thing's going down. And it's yield, cash flow, like you said, they're there to justify what keeping you in the fiat system. It's like this justification of like, well, my money is losing value, so these things are justifying why I'm in here. So it's really interesting. I would love for you to unpack some of this a little more, but also Bitcoin making people, so you alluded to this earlier, and I think this is something that it's not a conscious thing. I think it's a subconscious thing. This goes back to this humility thing of Bitcoin making people obsolete. And you would touch on this. I saw you on an interview. I don't know whose interview it was maybe Safety's or something like that, where you had talked about this. Like I think you said something like, like what I was doing was like pretty much no point to it. Like Bitcoin makes my job obsolete in a sense. And I've been thinking about this for years. And I think that inside most humans, that's why this humility thing comes in, because most people are scared. Just inside something in there, they just don't know what it is. And they're like, I think I might become moot at some point. Like what I'm doing isn't needed. So I'd love for you to unpack this some more. So I think it's a brilliant thought that just, again, doesn't get a lot of play.
I think even what we're doing today, eventually this is going to be obsolete. People aren't going to need to learn about Bitcoin anymore because they're going to already know about it. And the reason why I think that is because there's always going to be technological change. There's always going to be future generations. The only reason why the boomer generation, the Gen X, actually not even Gen X, I'd say baby boomers and older, the only reason why they've really held on to their power is because they've been able to create money out of thin air. They've been able to continuously print more money and support themselves. So for example, Social Security, that's costing 1.5 trillion dollars a year now. Medicare, Medicaid costing another 1.5 trillion dollars a year. So they can just print more money out of thin air and they can support themselves. That's the reason why they have all this power, and that's the reason why they continue to have all this power. What I think is going to happen is, as a financial, I worked as a CFA. My job was, as I had my CFA, and my job was as a fixed income analyst. The way that I see it, at some point, businesses are not going to need to buy fixed income. Like, let's say insurance companies, why would they need to buy fixed income that's making them 1 or 2% returns when they could buy, let's say, MicroStrategy's bonds and make a significantly higher return? Or they could just hold on to Bitcoin and they can just save their customers future payouts in Bitcoin. They don't have to worry about owning these bonds. They can just fulfill their customers, what are they called? Their customers' claims. Insurance companies, they can just fulfill their customer claims in Bitcoin. So why would they need to hold bonds? They don't really need to hold bonds anymore. The way that I see it, I was actually watching BNN yesterday, Business News Network, and I'm just watching these ads. It's crazy to me that people can just buy index funds, for example. They can buy the S&P 500, they can buy VOO, VFV, these ETFs, and they don't even have to go through these financial advisors. They don't need them. Their job is pretty much obsolete. All you need is, this is from my perspective at least, from somebody who's in their 30s, early 30s, all you need is term insurance. You need an emergency fund, maybe of 3 to 5 years of expenses. You need some Bitcoin. Maybe you can buy an ETF or something if you want to. You can buy S&P 500 ETF, whatever you need to save your future for the future. And you need some amount of personal possessions. Let's say you need a house. You need a house to pay to live in. You don't really need the advice that these financial advisors are offering you. They're taking 2 to 3% of your wealth every single year. They're extracting that wealth from you under the guise of, we're better at this than you. We understand the financial system better than you do. If anything, we're going to go from a percentage-based advice, so people charging you a percentage of how much money that you make. Let's say, for example, not how much money you make, the amount of your portfolio. Let's say you have a $500,000 portfolio. Your financial advisor is going to get $10,000 a year from you. At some point, I think we're going to see fee-only advisors. That's what I do. I do hourly advice. I do half an hour. People just book meetings with me, and once they have that advice, they can do whatever they want with it. I'm not going to continuously take money from them, no matter what. On the other hand, with financial advisors, if you're working with an advisor, they give you the advice once. You meet with them maybe once every 2, 3, 5 years. They put you in these ETFs, and they're going to consistently keep getting more and more money out of you. They're going to be able to keep extracting wealth from you. I think all of that is obsolete. I think everybody is going to be replaced. Let's say realtors. I used to work as a real estate agent before. I did really well in my first year, but I just thought, I don't like doing this. I don't know enough about this person's needs, this person's future, what they want to do, in order to tell them, hey, you should be buying real estate as an investment. It actually, it made me feel kind of weird to invest, to convince people to buy real estate as an investment, because once Bitcoin clicked, it just made everything else just seem like a gamble. Everything else just seemed like it was kind of a Ponzi scheme, a pyramid scheme, whatever you want to call it. But I think that all these jobs are going to go obsolete because we're no longer going to need people to manage our money for us. You can just hold Bitcoin. You can hold Bitcoin in a wallet and you don't have to deal with anybody else. Everybody's job is eventually going to go obsolete because we're going to have technology replacing them. Let's say construction workers. At some point, we're going to have 3D printers, machine-operated 3D printers that can build houses. We're going to have, I was talking to somebody else about this not too long ago. We're going to have machines that can fight off pests instead of using pesticides, instead of using the different things that we use to develop all these pesticides. All of these things are going to be replaced, at least in my opinion. That's the way that I see it. I think that if you own a business, owning Bitcoin is the perfect solution. because eventually you're going to get disrupted. No matter who you are, doesn't matter how powerful you think you are, doesn't matter how great you think you are, you're going to eventually run out of market cap to absorb. Apple, for example, their earnings only increased by something like 0.3% in the last 3 years. I was looking at a post, and inflation in that time has been 15%. So they've actually lost money. So Apple is going to get replaced in people's portfolios with Bitcoin. Apple is going to get disrupted. Microsoft, all these companies are going to get disrupted, and the people that are working there, their jobs are going to be automated away. Even cashiers, for example, we're getting more and more machines, more and more computers to do their job for them. And over time, if you don't have a backup plan for the skills that you have, so you've developed a certain level of skills, if you don't have a backup plan for when those skills are obsolete, then you're kind of screwed. I think Bitcoin is that backup plan.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's funny. I think of Robert Kiyosaki, because he was, like I was telling you before, he was always my biggest mentor in the beginning 15 years ago. And he'd always say the financial advisors were salespeople for Wall Street.
Yeah.
And I was in, like I was telling you, I was in real estate too. And same thing, like you just had this, I lost many sales over the years because I was like, well, I mean, I wouldn't do it. I mean, like if you need to move from here to here, like, yeah, like I'll help you. And like, we help a lot of people and that's fine. But they'd come to you and they're like, well, no, I mean, I wouldn't do that if I were you, like, or if I was me, I wouldn't be doing it, but hey, you do you, and eventually it just like after a while, you're like, why am I doing this? And once Bitcoin clicks, you're just like, okay, like I need to move on. It makes me think of the other side of that is Dave Ramsey too, which I know that school pretty well also. And I'm guessing you might as well, but like he is now, what he suggests is right to a degree of like save, make sure you're saving more than you spend, but they're saving in the wrong thing, right? Like, again, going back to what you were just saying, like you're saving in dollars and are losing value. It's just, it's really wild. I would love for you to unpack a little bit more. Oh, go ahead.
So sorry, for Dave Ramsey, he actually suggests people to buy mutual funds, and the funds that he offers,
that's right.
The funds that he actually recommends have high fees, which to me it makes me angry. It doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you intentionally tell somebody to buy a fund with a 1.5% management fee when you can get them to buy an index fund like VOO, which is going to give you a 0.04% management fee? And that makes it very clear he's definitely getting some kind of commission. He's getting some kind of cut out of it where it benefits him to continue to tell his audience that they should buy this inferior product over the superior one.
I remember I don't know if you were privy to this program where I don't know where they did it, but I remember here in Michigan, they had a Dave Ramsey, his ELP people. And I remember looking into that, or maybe someone, got a hold of us. I don't remember how it came about. It was 10 years ago or whatever. And I think we were in the program for like a year or something like that. And this was probably 2014 or 15. And we, it was like, okay. And then he'd send you whatever, like people are looking for a house in an area. And so they'd say, hey, here's a couple of realtors in the area. And then like after a year or two, it was really early, like I hadn't been in there very long. And they started making you pay for, you had to pay a certain amount. So like if there was a closing and you help someone, you had to pay a fee to them, a finder's fee. It's like, okay, whatever. They're monetizing his influence or whatever. But then you had to pay a fee at some point where I was like, we're gone. Like I'm dropping from this garbage. Like, so you had to pay a fee just to be in the program. And then you had to pay a finder's fee. Like once the thing closed, I mean, it's just like,
it seems like a pyramid scheme.
Exactly. It's just like, okay, Dave, like, what are we doing, man? Like, it was just, there's a lot of like conflicting things. Like, it seems like a good guy. Seems like they have a lot of good stuff going on. But it is like, it's weird. Like we're going to mutual funds. We're doing this. I don't know. And it's just like lowest common denominator thinking with him, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So that's why I always respected Kiyosaki, because he was always, hey, I'm going to tell you whatever it is. I might not always be right. I know everyone loves his crash thing, which, he's still operating a little bit of this old paradigm of like, we live in reality or like accountability, and there's not going to be just QE infinity going forward. So that's his one downfall. But his thing was always debt. Right. And you just had a tweet about this earlier today, actually, just about debt and how the winners are the people who, so I'd love you to unpack this a little bit, just like people that take debt out, which, there's the good debt and bad debt, as Kiyosaki would say, Dave Ramsey would say, there's just really everything is bad debt. But the people that are winning and are going to win going forward are people that have debt. And I would argue good or bad debt. Like I think people with bad debt, at least in terms of like yourself personally, like I've got a car loan or I've got my own house I'm living in, like those are bad debt in Kiyosaki's eyes. But those people are going to win anyway, because I don't think you're going to have foreclosures. You're not going to have like mass exodus of this asset class, because there's going to be so much social pressure to get rid of student loans. Oh, you can't get rid of 10 million people from their houses. Like, can you imagine people on social media just being like, hey, the Chase Bank's kicking out the Johnson family? Like, what do you, there's no way. So it's just going to be QE infinity. It's just massive QE. Anyone who's holding debt will eventually win. There'll be a debt jubilee, get liquidated. Their debt will get liquidated at some point. So I'd love for you to kind of unpack some of that and just your thoughts there of just how this kind of goes. Like I said, you alluded to earlier today, and just the winners of the world going forward and using debt.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, the U.S. government is the biggest. They have the biggest amount of debt in the entire world. They have $36 trillion worth of debt. They know that the value of that debt is going to keep decreasing. They're going to be able to pay back less money in the future than whatever the real value of the money that they borrowed today is. Even with interest, let's say if interest is 2% and inflation is 7, 8, 10%, you're gaining 8% by borrowing this money, by having some bank created out of thin air for you. That's I think that's pretty much the principle. When, let's say, for example, if somebody wants to buy a real estate property and they want to use it as a rental property, they can buy it using money that the bank created out of nothing. That's literally it. They can bring their future consumption to the present, and they're pretty much guaranteed to make money. If they take this risk, there's really no risk anymore at this point. The financial system is built on just people guaranteeing profits for themselves over time. Like, let's say the stock market, over time the stock market is always going to go up because there's no risk. There's more money that's going to be added to the economy. All of that money is going to keep getting added to the stock market, and the people who own stocks are pretty much guaranteed winners at this point, in this system at least. So the reason why I think that the people who take on debt are going to be the winners is because they get to bring their future consumption to the present. Nobody knows if they're even going to have to pay back that debt, but they have this asset at the end of it. So let's say with a real estate investor, they can buy a $500,000 house. If they have $100,000 set aside today, they can buy a $500,000 house by borrowing $400,000 or whatever the ratios are. Sometimes you can get only 65% loans. Sometimes you can get 50%, whatever the numbers are. But you can borrow part of the money of that, part of the value of that house, and you can put it towards the house, and you can guarantee a profit over time. And you're using leverage to guarantee this profit. So instead of getting a 2-3% return, like the housing market would increase at 2-3%, you're getting 10-15% returns. So why wouldn't you continue to do this? In this current system, the debt, because the money can be created out of nothing, whoever takes on debt, whoever understands that money can be created out of nothing, is at a massive advantage. It's an information asymmetry. It's like if you were playing a game of Monopoly and the banker kept funding themselves over and over again, no matter what happened, they can never go bankrupt. Who's going to lose? Everybody else. Everybody else ends up paying for that banker's mistakes, because when the banker can keep creating more money and taking more money out of the bank and adding it to the economy, it's just going to keep increasing the prices of everything. Let's say the people who, let's say somebody has a Park Place and they get rent on that, and they keep getting rent, and they can keep upgrading their property, and they keep charging higher and higher rents, and then the banker can keep borrowing more and more money. It screws over all the other players, but whoever owns those properties keep gaining and gaining and gaining, because they know for a fact that the property value is going to keep increasing. They're going to be able to continue to pay more, continue to charge more and more in rent over time, and it's all it's how it works in real life too. If you can corrupt the financial system, if you can corrupt the basis of the entire system, the monetary system, if you can corrupt that, then you've basically won before you even started the game. If somebody can keep, we go back to the housing example. A landlord can go and borrow money to buy a real life product that everybody needs to survive. Everybody needs shelter. They can borrow money that's created out of nothing, and they can buy that real life good, and then they can charge other people for borrowing that good from them. Just that alone, like it's crazy to me when you think of it that way, because you're extracting value from people who are actually creating value, and you're giving that value to the bank. So the bank is going to get interest no matter what. You're going to get your rental payments no matter what. The people at the bottom are the ones who are screwed. And I think the thing that a lot of people haven't even considered is that more and more people are willing to not live in a house. More and more people are willing to live in their cars. And I think that just that mindset, if that spreads with a lot of people, it's going to break the entire system. Because if people don't have demand for these properties, then how are the property values going to go up? If nobody's willing to pay the rent on these properties, how is the rent going to continue to rise? It won't. This is how the system is built. The system is built on this fake foundation, and that foundation is debt. If people stop paying back their debts, the entire system collapses.
What do you actually one second? Because I had a quick thought too on this. You mentioned something about just the money supply and stuff like that. The one thing that really blew my mind, this was before Raoul Paul became Rug Paul. It was like 4 years ago. He had a great chart on I think it was Exponential Age. He had this report, which is actually a really good report, and it still stands a test of time today too, even for any Bitcoiner people. Someone let's go look at it. But it was right at the beginning of 2020, and he just showed all the G4 central banks and all the currency printing, and then divided it by the different asset classes, basically. And it showed this 6 to 10% money, which is like everyone kind of thinks like, oh, the market's going back to this Dave Ramsey stuff and all these things, these preconceived notions, what everyone's just kind of grown up with. The markets grow at 6 to 10% a year. And real estate, I mean, if people are lucky in a way, they grow 6 to 10% a year. A lot of markets are less than that. So you have money printing, though, is the thing that's left out of that, which is, I think it's Tad Smith, the Sotheby's ex-CEO, and like there's some people that have been talking about this recently, some of their epiphanies over the last couple of years of, wait, the money supply has been growing at 6 to 10% a year. So coming full circle to what Raul had showed in these charts was it was just sideways. Like the GFC happened, it was just straight down, and then it was just sideways for like 10 years from 2010 to 2020. And it was real estate to the G4 central bank printing divided by real estate, and then divided by the S&P 500, and they were just all completely sideways. And the NASDAQ had outperformed a little bit, obviously, and then Bitcoin just completely outperformed. And I go back to like some of like even Mike Maloney or Gold and Silver when I was studying that 15 years ago, or Robert Kiyosaki, which was the invisible crash. And gold would kind of show you that for a long time, but then Bitcoin that was another thing that helped me open my eyes was, oh my gosh, everything's crashing, just completely crashing against Bitcoin. And it's the invisible crash. Things are crashing. It's like this melt up boom. Everyone thinks like, oh, things are so amazing. Look at all the prices are going up. Like my assets are going up in value. You're really just going sideways if you're lucky, and everything's crashing in this asset that people aren't paying attention to. And that to me is absolutely wild. And again, just doesn't get talked about enough. And in saying that part, we talked about robotics earlier, AI. I would love for you to talk a little bit about just deflation and inflation, and how Bitcoin, I look at it, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of look at, Bitcoin captures inflation, this printing, and we kind of have noted that, but also deflation, which you alluded to, which is people leaving these other asset classes, waking up technology, or they're losing their job or whatever it is, and then they're pulling monetary premium from these other assets and then putting it into Bitcoin. So it captures both worlds, which I've on Twitter recently, I've had some conversations with like, crypto bros and all, and it was just like blowing their mind. They're like, what do you mean? Like, what does this even mean? Like they couldn't even wrap their minds around this. So I would love for you to kind of touch on, these couple of points, whatever kind of strikes at you here. But I think it's very important to just, get that kind of education out there.
Yeah, for sure. So the way that I see it, I think Jeff Booth probably put it best. The natural state of the world is deflationary. So just to put it into perspective, if there are more dollars chasing houses, then the price of housing is going to increase. Over time, more and more dollars are chasing houses. More and more dollars are being printed, added to the economy, and they're chasing houses. So what's happening is the price of housing is going up and up and up, and it'll continue to rise forever in terms of dollars, because the dollar can be created out of thin air. Dollars are easier to produce than houses. So because dollars are easier to produce, you can create more dollars. You can use those dollars to buy houses. And that's just going to bump the price of housing up forever. Whenever there's quantitative easing, whenever there's more money being added to the economy, whenever governments borrow more money, whenever the US government borrows more money, the price of housing is going to increase because more money is being added to the system. Technically, the US government will never have to pay back its debt because it can just roll it over. It can just borrow more money to pay back its debt. And to me, that's just absolutely insane. But when you look at it from a Bitcoin perspective, because Bitcoin is becoming harder to create more of, we see that the price of everything is decreasing. So fewer and fewer Bitcoin are chasing houses over time. Over time, let's say in the beginning, from 2009 till 2012, there were 50 Bitcoin being produced every 10 minutes. So at the time, there were it took 12 seconds to produce one Bitcoin. That's how I would say it. over time, it's become harder and harder to produce Bitcoin because it takes more time, more energy, more effort to create Bitcoin. In 2012, it went from it went from 12 seconds to produce a Bitcoin to 24 seconds. Then in 2016, it went from 24 to 48. Then in 2020, it went from 48 to 96 seconds to produce a Bitcoin, and so on. It'll keep increasing and increasing until at some point there's going to be no more Bitcoin being produced. At the same time, it becomes easier and easier to produce everything else. So let's say houses, we get better at even digging let's go with digging foundations. Before, you used to use a shovel to dig a foundation. We didn't have the technology. However it worked, I don't know. I can't tell you the historical references, but before we used to dig with our hands. We used to use our hands to dig a foundation, and we would make a foundation for the house, and it would take us a week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks, 10 weeks, however long it would take. Whatever it took back then, the number of people that it took back then, it takes less time, effort, energy to produce that foundation for the house. So now, instead of having 10 people digging holes, we have one tractor operated by one person digging that hole so much faster, and we're now able to dig more holes than we could back then. So over time, it's taking less and less energy, effort, and resources to dig the foundation for a house. And what that means is that we should be able to produce more houses. We should be able to increase the abundance of houses in the economy. And that's not actually happening because the amount of dollars that are being added to the economy, dollars are being added to the economy faster than we can make technology improve the sorry, dollars are being added to the economy faster than we can improve the building of houses. So we can't speed up the production of houses as fast as we can speed up the production of dollars. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then on the other end,
I was explaining this to my wife the other day. Yes.
And then on the other hand, on the other end, it's exactly the same thing, right? With houses, you can make it easier and easier to produce houses. Like you could make it easier and easier to produce dollars before, but it becomes harder and harder to produce Bitcoin. So the same amount of Bitcoin won't be chasing the same number of houses. Fewer and fewer Bitcoin are going to be chasing the same number of houses because that Bitcoin is being redistributed. There are only 21 million Bitcoin. So right now, the price of a house is 4 Bitcoin. The number of people who have 4 Bitcoin to spend on a house is going to decrease. Eventually, there's going to be nearly nobody who has 4 Bitcoin to pay for a house. And on a Bitcoin standard, the way that I see it, you can't really take on debt because there's massive counterparty risks. In the current financial system, banks can keep giving you debt because they can print more money. If you default, they just print more money and they make themselves whole. On a Bitcoin standard, they can't do that. So if banks want to lend you money and you default on them, they're screwed. So they're probably not going to give out mortgages for houses. They're probably going to let you borrow against your Bitcoin. But what this is going to do is it's going to decrease the amount of people who are able to buy houses. People can't bring their future consumption to the present anymore. Today, people can bring 30 years of consumption to the present. They can bring their next 30 years of consumption to the present, and they can pay interest for it on a Bitcoin standard. I don't think this is going to happen. So what this does is, as there's less demand for houses, as people have to save for houses, instead of having to buy, instead of being able to buy a house today and bring 30 years of consumption to the present, what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to save for, let's say, 5 years in Bitcoin to buy a house. And what that does immediately, in the immediate present, what that does is it decreases the demand for houses. If the demand for houses decreases, house prices drop. If house prices drop, more people can afford to buy houses. If more people can afford to buy houses, they can spend more of their income on things that they love to do. Maybe they can become more of a creative. Maybe they can create more content on YouTube, like us. We're saving in Bitcoin. We can pay for our lifestyle, so we've put in the effort to start creating more content, things that we love, and over the long term, all this is going to do is decrease the cost of living. It's going to just keep decreasing the cost of living because Bitcoin becomes harder to create over time while dollars become easier. Everything else becomes easier to create over time. Bitcoin is the only thing that becomes more and more difficult to create over time. Even gold. We're probably going to find ways to produce gold out of nothing, like we did with lab-grown diamonds. We're probably going to find ways to bring more gold into the economy. Let's say there's a lot of information about how we can mine asteroids. I don't know when that's going to happen. I don't know if that's going to happen. But if it's a possibility, if there's this uncertainty there, people are going to want to dump their gold because they're expecting that this may happen in the future. What Bitcoin does is it gets rid of all of the uncertainty. You know for a fact that there's only going to be 21 million. You know for a fact that there's only ever going to be this maximum supply of Bitcoin. Everything else will keep becoming more and more abundant in comparison with Bitcoin, and entrepreneurs will be incentivized to produce more goods and services to accumulate Bitcoin. So what we're going to see is we're just going to see this massive deflation because more and more goods and services are going to be added to the economy. In terms of Bitcoin, prices will all come down because fewer and fewer Bitcoin are available to be exchanged for those goods and services. Over time, like I've said this in videos, I've said this, I think I said this earlier, over time, Bitcoin runs out at every single price. So depending on what you say that price is, let's say, for example, houses. Houses used to cost 64,000 Bitcoin in 2011. Today, if you have 64,000 Bitcoin, you have $6.4 billion. How many houses can you buy with that? 15,000 houses. And to me, that's crazy. So the people who saved that Bitcoin, there's not that many of them. How many people have 64,000 Bitcoin? Probably maybe 1, 2, 5 people in the world. Those the number of people who have that amount of Bitcoin is going to run out until they're not willing to pay for your house in Bitcoin anymore. So eventually, we're going to see today that the price of a house is 4 Bitcoin. It's going to drop to 1 Bitcoin. It's going to drop to 0.25 Bitcoin. It's going to drop to 0.1 Bitcoin. It's going to keep dropping until you're basically paying next to nothing for houses. So anybody who saves in Bitcoin today will be able to accumulate more of the things that they want in the future.
It's so beautifully said. It's in a way, it's not flipping supply and demand on its head. It's just the monetary layer is flipped on its head and puts consumers and producers on the same side of the table, right? And that's what fiat doesn't allow. It's always a combative zero-sum game to an extent, and that's where this aligns everything. And man, you put that so beautifully. It's boy, wow, yeah.
I think in the current
why do you
I think sorry to cut you off. I think in the current system, the prices are determined by consumers. On a Bitcoin standard, it'll be determined by savers. I think that's the main difference.
Real capital. And
Yeah,
capitalism
capital,
needs
exactly.
actual capital, right?
Yeah, that's
Not
exactly.
like,
Yeah.
Yeah. You said that so beautifully. I mean, that was the first time I've ever really heard it put that way. Like I've heard it explained in certain ways, but you came at it from. I always look at it just from, I guess, how I asked you the question initially of just, hey, I'm seeing the benefit of just owning real money, the only true money we've ever discovered. So I'm pulling my premiums. And so you have utility in real estate, we'll say, and then a monetary premium. And I'm stripping my monetary premium away and I'm moving it over to the actual money. Now the real estate just has utility. So that's the way I always looked at it. But you explain it from a supply and demand point of view, which is fascinating. And again, no one really talks about it in those terms of like, hey, even the sense of like, hey, I own the hardest money in the world. So I'm not going to pay 1,000 Bitcoin for that house. I'm only going to pay one, so like it's going to have to be driven down to that point where and that's just, wow. Yeah. I love the way you said that. That's beautiful. And speaking of utility too, I'd love to ask you this. Like you always see from gold bugs which again, a recovering gold bug, myself type of thing, right? Real estate guy, all this stuff. And so you have this world of, and you get a lot with the altcoins too. It's like utility's everything. Like there's no intrinsic value in Bitcoin. There's no utility. And it's like, one, you have to just be like oblivious to what Bitcoin does and all the applications that Bitcoin has. But how do you handle that when someone's coming at you with this utility? Because we kind of touched on this utility versus monetary premium, but how do you attack that?
I don't think that this isn't my analogy, but I heard somebody say this. If we want to price things based on utility, oxygen would be the most expensive thing in the world.
Yeah.
I think that's just the basic. That's just the basics of it, right? Oxygen is free, but because it's abundant, we have as much of it as we want to. Nobody can stop you from having oxygen, even if they tried. Like they can block your nose, they can close your mouth, of course.
Yep.
But you're probably going to be dead before you can pay them for oxygen, right? So the thing about oxygen is that it's abundant. We need it to survive. It has that utility, but it's free. On the other hand, we have something like gold. I think gold is useful to a lot of people, but it's a lot less useful than oxygen. gold is a lot more expensive than oxygen because of the it's not abundant. It's not easily found everywhere in the world. So I think that just kind of, I think that makes a lot of sense to a lot of people when you look at it from that perspective. But I also think that Bitcoin separates money from utility. So before Bitcoin, money had to have utility because somebody had to want it.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of Bitcoin, that's completely different, because Bitcoin, we know for a fact that Bitcoin is the only certain thing in the world. We know for a fact that there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. We know for a fact that there's never going to be more than that. We can't change that number. People want it because of that. People want it because of that 21 million. People want it because they can use it to transact on the Bitcoin network. Bitcoin technically does have utility because you can use it. It's the only thing that you can use to pay for transaction fees. But if you get away from that, Bitcoin doesn't need to have utility to work. Money doesn't have to have utility to work. All you need is something that can store value. It can be a medium of exchange, and it can be a unit of account. Other people need to want it. It needs to have these certain characteristics: fungibility, scarcity, durability, all those characteristics. It needs to have that. Bitcoin has all those characteristics. It doesn't need to be something that you can use. Like, you can use gold as a paperweight. Who's using gold as a paperweight? You can use gold as you can use gold in electronics. How many people are using gold in electronics? They're not. They're just keeping it in their safe. They don't really care about the use in electronics. All they care about is the you have to go back to first principles. Yeah. They care about the scarcity. They care about the fact that nobody else can print gold. And that's what makes gold so special. That's what makes gold such great money. It makes gold such a great financial product because nobody can print it. Nobody can create it out of thin air and add more of it to the economy. Same thing with Bitcoin. People say that Bitcoin is digital gold, and that's because Bitcoin has all of the characteristics that gold has, but it's digital. You can't send gold over the internet to somebody else. You can't transact with gold. How many people are even using gold to transact today? Gold is the most valuable asset in the world. It's worth $19 trillion. Nothing else even comes close. I think the next most valuable asset's like $3.53 trillion, whatever it is. One of these companies, Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia. But people aren't using gold for its utility. They just have it in safes. Like, I have an ounce of gold that's just sitting there. I haven't used it for anything. I haven't used it. I haven't made electronics with it. I just, it's just sitting in one of my drawers. It's just sitting there. It's not doing anything. I'm just holding it because it's scarce. So the utility doesn't really matter. So the people who do say that utility is what we need, I don't think they quite understand it. I think they're trying to sell you some kind of narrative that they believe, and they don't quite understand it, again, from first principles, like from the basis of thinking.
Yeah, it's wild that you say that, because you just made me think of too, like it goes back to earlier we were talking about this. It's because it's like the cash flow dividends yield. It's those are a justification for holding fiat. It's like this. Yeah. It's like this trick being played of like, well, I'm getting these things, so I'll hold the fiat, I guess. And similar to gold, I never thought of gold that way, but gold, because it was the best, and this is where people get confused, it was the best thing we had for thousands of years. There wasn't anything better we had, so we had this thing, it was the best, but there's still an inflation rate. There's a mining rate of around 2% a year, right? So in order to justify holding it, you had this utility. You had utility in order to justify, well, I can use it in other things. Like you said, the utility is kind of what justified someone holding it. Like, well, I can do X with it, and it is the most scarce thing I have, so it has it. But like you said, Bitcoin just is, because it is the best money we've ever found, perfectly finite. You can just hold it. And like the environmental application, all these things that are actually happening opposite of what the average person thinks, actually cleaning up the environment, doing these things that you couldn't do. It actually does have utility, but that's like a whole different conversation. But just being perfect money in essence, or triple ledger money accounting system, that right there is the game changer, where it's like, I don't need the utility in order to justify using Bitcoin. Really fascinating. Yeah. I love that explanation. Where do you think, kind of tangent a little bit, and I got a few more, I know we've been going for a little while here. Where do you think the global hash rate, and it feels like the global hash rate is obviously like kind of going exponential right now, but like where do you feel like there's this moment, or do you see something, at least when you're looking at everything, that kind of sparks off this global hash war, this global hash race? I know Max Kaiser's talked about this for a long time, countries, because it feels like we are literally like in a tinderbox. Putin's talking about it, all these different things going on, and it just feels like at some point something just tips off, and it's just off to the races. And it feels that way. It's felt like that way for a little bit. But is there something that you're kind of looking at, or you're waiting waiting for to as that like, hey, here we go moment?
I don't think there's going to be a here you go kind of moment like that. Maybe the
Mm-hmm.
strategic Bitcoin reserve, maybe that'll
Mm-hmm.
get things to go crazy. But even the hash rate, it's going to keep increasing.
Yeah.
That's why I think that it's very difficult to invest in mining companies. I actually had
Yeah.
some leaps on Bitfarms. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you know them. I had
Yeah.
some leaps over the last 2 years. I expected them to do great when Bitcoin rises because they hold Bitcoin. But the issue is that with mining companies, it's very difficult to invest in them because there's always going to be more competition. So
Mm-hmm.
you can keep buying mining companies, you can keep trying to find the best mining company, but over time I think there's going to be more and more competition. More and more countries are going to try to mine for Bitcoin. We know Bhutan is mining for Bitcoin. So there's always going to be competition for these companies that are mining for Bitcoin and that's their main business. And that's partly why I don't like investing in mining companies because there's always somebody who can disrupt them. Just like every other business, if you can just hold on to Bitcoin, I think that's probably the best way to go. And I think that's where things are going. If we have the US starting a strategic Bitcoin reserve, Canada should start a strategic Bitcoin reserve with the tariffs that are coming in. I don't know when they're going to do it. I don't know if they're going to do it, but they should. I think that's the only way, that's the only solution for them. I think holding Bitcoin is the only solution. You can start a business, you can try mining for Bitcoin as a country, but if you don't have the underlying asset, then there's nothing that you can do to protect yourself. Your miners can be taken from you. Miners are physical, like the ASICs are physical, so somebody can come over and take them from you. So I think I don't know if I'm answering your question here, but I think the main thing that's
Mm-hmm.
going to really spark people is the fact that countries are starting to accumulate. I even think then people are still going to continue to ignore it. The average person doesn't have time for this. The average person is spending so much time at work. They're spending so much time with their family, their friends. They have hobbies. They want to watch TV. They want to go on Instagram. They want to play video games. They want to do all this. So you can't even blame them, right? Because over time, it's just getting harder and harder to make ends meet. So they have to put all of this time towards the things that they need to do to decompress. You can't blame them for wanting to watch TV. You can't blame them for wanting to forget about the day that they had. You can't blame them for drinking. You can't blame them for doing any of that because life is just getting harder. It's inherently just getting harder. And it's going to continue to get harder. It's going to continue to get harder. So I think what's going to happen is most people are going to ignore this. I don't think there's going to be a spark for most people. You have to actually be aware that something is happening for you to actually adopt Bitcoin, right? For me, for example, if FTX hadn't collapsed, I probably wouldn't have paid attention to Bitcoin at all. Or if we hadn't had that massive um, if he hadn't had that massive collapse from Terra Luna, whatever it was, if they
Mm-hmm.
hadn't collapsed, I probably wouldn't have been paying attention to Bitcoin. If Bitcoin had just gone straight up, I would have ignored it because I would have thought, oh, it's too expensive. What's the point of buying it now? I can't get to one Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
It's over. It's too expensive. I can't get it. So I think what's going to happen is a lot of people are just going to ignore it because, for all we know, in this current cycle, because it's basically backed by these institutions that can create more money, that can keep borrowing more money, like Michael Saylor. The amount of money that Michael Saylor can get is pretty much unlimited because he's buying this asset that he can use as collateral, and the value of this asset keeps going up, and he basically can control the price of this asset now. He can keep buying more and more, he can keep pumping the price up, and he'll be able to borrow more and more money against that asset to buy more of it. So I personally think that a lot of people have I don't think a lot of people are going to get it. I don't think there's going to be a spark for most people because the price is probably not going to dump to where they want it to dump, and they're just going to forget about it. I have a lot of friends who actually, I have one friend who I was telling about Bitcoin at 30K and he ignored it. He said, oh, I'm going to buy it at 25K. Then I told him again at 70K. He said, no, I'm going to buy it at 40, 35K, whatever the number was that you told me last time. I'll buy it then. If it drops back down, I'll buy it then. Then I told this friend again at 100K that Bitcoin, you should buy some. And he said, I'll wait for it to go to 80K. He never ended up buying it because the price is just too high for people. They just don't want to get rid of their ego. Most people are just not willing to buy at a higher price than whatever they were first introduced to Bitcoin at. I think that's the thing that holds a lot of people back. And there's no spark that can change that. You can't change somebody's ego. There's nothing that a government can do. There's nothing that a strategic Bitcoin reserve can do to make those people change. And once those people finally figure it out, I think it'll be at a 10x, 100x from where it is today. And at that point, it's going to be too late. They're not going to be able to accumulate the same amount of Bitcoin that they can accumulate today. It's not going to be too late just in general. You're still going to be early to Bitcoin if somebody's willing to accept fiat for it. But at some point, they're not going to be able to afford the Bitcoin that they can today. So if somebody can afford 0.1 Bitcoin today, they're probably not going to open their eyes up to it until they can only afford 0.01 Bitcoin. I think that's what's going to happen. I think a lot of people are going to go through the pain. There's a guy on X, his name is Sunny. He says the beatings will continue until the education improves. So, and that's completely true. I completely agree. Most people are not going to get Bitcoin. They're not going to understand it until they put in the time to educate themselves on what it is.
Could not agree more. You touched on something too. I wanted to get your thought on was this, just the selling pressure. And the question really is, and then I'll kind of give context in a way, so we'll do it in reverse. But I want, like, what are your price models, your USD to Bitcoin price models of that you kind of use or loosely use, or maybe there's some of your own models that you kind of look at. And why I was asking that was just, you touched on MicroStrategy and what, say BlackRock, nation states, mining, Bhutan, etc. Putin's talking about it. These are, and then SOB 121 getting repealed. These are things that decrease selling pressure. Like, these people aren't going to sell Bitcoin. They don't have a need to sell Bitcoin, and people can lend against their Bitcoin. Again, that dries up the sell pressure, and the mining will be there obviously for a while, and that selling that's going on. But a lot of them, I mean, heck, you have more of these guys that are taking on debt, right? And they're putting Bitcoin on their own balance sheet. So it's this wild time that it's kind of like, and that's where I go to, like, this tinderbox too, in a way, where it's like, at some point the price is just going to run away so quickly that people, it's going to blow people away. And so my question is, again, models, what are you kind of looking at for pricing? And it kind of leads into also like the diminishing returns thing. I mean, are you a believer in that? It doesn't seem like you are. I'm not at all, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
My target for Bitcoin is infinity. There's no target. The dollar and Bitcoin just there's no way to see what the value of Bitcoin should be in terms of dollars. You can see the value of Bitcoin in terms of other things. Let's say houses. I think houses would be a better way to predict the value of Bitcoin. I think a house is going to be costing 1 Bitcoin at some point. It's going to cost 0.1 Bitcoin. It's going to cost 0.01 Bitcoin. The price of houses will keep decreasing. In terms of US dollars, because US dollars can be created out of nothing. You have no idea when they'll be created. You know for a fact that it takes some time, effort, energy to produce houses. It takes time, effort, energy to produce everything. It takes no time and effort and energy to produce dollars. So the price of Bitcoin can rise literally forever, and it can keep going up. It can keep going up. There's no price. There's no top for Bitcoin, because as people say, there's no bottom for fiat. So to me, I mean, the model is that Bitcoin is going up forever. That's it. No matter what happens, if I use Bitcoin as a savings account, so if I need more fiat, I'm going to sell some Bitcoin. If I have extra fiat, I'm going to buy Bitcoin with it. It doesn't matter what the price is. I literally don't care. I bought Bitcoin at 109K when it reached 109K for a few days, or for a few hours, whatever it was. I went in and I bought some Bitcoin because I just wanted to. It was just a way that it's just the way that I do things. But I also bought Bitcoin at 16K. Because I buy Bitcoin no matter what. No matter what the price is, it doesn't matter. I'm going to buy some Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the best asset in the world. Nothing can compete with Bitcoin. So the model that I have, there's no top. I think a lot of people, like, let's say for example, the power law. I had a conversation with Giovanni. I think his name is Giovanni. He was talking about how in the last 16 years, Bitcoin has followed this rule. It's followed this model very closely, and I get it. He's a mathematician. He understands it much better than I do, but I don't think he considers the fact that the U.S. government can print money. I don't think that model considers the fact that the U.S. government can print money. Over time, fewer and fewer people are going to be willing to give away their Bitcoin for dollars, and that's definitely going to have some pressure on the price. It's going to push the price up significantly, and that's going to happen no matter what. I don't think there's any way to really avoid that. But I think the main takeaway here should be that no matter what price you're buying Bitcoin at, eventually you're going to be right. If you buy Bitcoin, if you pay somebody $150,000 for a Bitcoin today, eventually that person is going to feel stupid for selling their Bitcoin for $150,000, right? That's just how it is. Unless they buy some back. Let's say they sell it to you for 150,000, they buy back 1.5 Bitcoin. Of course, they're going to feel smart. But let's say, for example, they sell you that Bitcoin and they never buy it back. Eventually, at some point, they're going to feel really stupid. That's just the key. I think that's the most important thing to take away here. I don't think we're going to see diminishing returns. The reason for that is because in the past, a lot of market activity was based on emotional retail investors. Retail investors do whatever they think is right in the moment. If the price is dropping, they're going to sell. If the price is rising, they're going to buy. Institutional investors don't work that way. Institutional investors, once they understand what something is, they're going to have a constant bid for it. They're going to continue to buy. They're going to continue to buy. Exactly what Michael Saylor is doing. Michael Saylor kept buying more and more. If anything, Michael Saylor is buying more when the price rises. He's putting more buy pressure into the market when the price rises. So what we're going to see, at least in my opinion, is we're not going to see diminishing returns. I think returns are going to accelerate. I think we're going to see that S curve. A lot of people don't agree with me on this, and that's perfectly fine. The way that I see it, because the number of dollars in the system keeps rising, the price of Bitcoin will continue to rise forever. The rate at which the rate at which the Bitcoin price rises is all determined based on who's willing to sell. If nobody's willing to sell their Bitcoin for dollars, the price is going to rise faster. It's just going to be an incentive for them to sell their Bitcoin for dollars. But eventually, nobody's going to want dollars anymore. And I strongly believe that. I stand behind that thought firmly because dollars can be created out of nothing and Bitcoin can't.
So beautifully said. What are some people actually really quick for do the last two? What do you have any thoughts on just the tether? I don't know if you saw, just came out like last day or so, just the tether and lightning stuff. Looks very, very interesting. But if you saw that, maybe throw something out there, a thought on that. If not, then we can move on.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I think that just shows you that the stablecoin economy and Bitcoin are coming together. They're working together. I don't really have that many thoughts on it. I still think that the USDT is going to be worthless at some point. I think US dollars are worthless. The way that I see it, I don't want to hold US dollars.
I love you.
Right. I want to get rid of US dollars. I want to get rid of them as soon as possible. But the fact that we have this kind of mix between Bitcoin and the US dollar, and the fact that we have this Lightning network, and the Lightning network is being used to transfer US dollars, that just changes things, right? We no longer need banks. We no longer need financial. We're basically just eliminating as many financial institutions as we can as quickly as possible. Think about how many financial. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I love that you're saying this, because again, this goes back to the altcoin thing of like XRP. The only thing the XRP crowd I see is, well, it's going to take away Swift and like we're the new CBDC coin. It's like, what number one, it's the same system, guys. Number two, like Lightning, like we already have these things. You guys are late to the party. That's what's anyway. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, that's really it, right? A lot of people from XRP, they say, oh, you can exchange between currencies. You can do this, you can do that. I saw this post on Reddit that said, oh, you can send Bitcoin to someone on the XRP ledger for cheaper. But you can't, because it's just another layer on top of Bitcoin. If you're not sending a transaction on the base layer of Bitcoin, you're not sending Bitcoin. Same thing with Lightning. Lightning is a great technology and all that, but you're using custodians, you're using counterparties, you have people in the middle who you have to trust in order to run that Lightning node, in order to run that Lightning, whatever it's called. I don't know the technicals. I'm going to admit to you that that's my weakness here, but you're still having to trust somebody. That's the key. Same thing with XRP. Until you have Bitcoin on the base layer, you're still trusting someone. If you have Bitcoin on a Lightning wallet, you're trusting someone with that Bitcoin. You don't actually have that Bitcoin. Unless you have your seed phrase, unless you have your 12 words, that Bitcoin is not yours. And that's the key here. So back to the Lightning and Tether conversation. What this is going to do is it's going to make Bitcoin better. It's going to make Bitcoin more powerful. We can now send US dollars on Bitcoin. We'll eventually be able to send euros on Bitcoin. Eventually, the people who want US dollars, the people who want USDT, they'll realize that they shouldn't hold US dollars. They should hold Bitcoin because Bitcoin is appreciating in value. If you hold Bitcoin, let's say you hold US dollars versus Bitcoin, the US dollar is going to keep decreasing in value. If you hold USDT, it's going to keep decreasing in purchasing power. But if you hold Bitcoin using the same network, if instead of receiving USDT, you receive Bitcoin on Lightning, you're increasing your purchasing power over time. I think this is just going to open Bitcoin up to a lot more people. I think that's the key. It's going to make more people see that Bitcoin is the future, that Bitcoin is the biggest financial system in the world, and now the US dollar is being traded on Bitcoin. Is this going to make this thing explode?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm in alignment with you there. All right, last couple here. What are the Bitcoiners? What are the people like who you're studying right now? Like who are the people that have had some really big impact on you? Just kind of your aha moments, your this transition to Bitcoin over the last handful of years, and who are you studying right now that you're really finding very useful?
I don't really study specific people. What I try to do is I try to look at different people's opinions on certain ideas. So for example, I was trying to learn more about what the circular economy is. So I just went on Google, I searched circular economy, and I found different sources for the circular economy.
Mm,
The way that I see it, I think I think everybody deserves time. I think everybody deserves to have a voice in this because everybody has their own experience, right? Let's say, for example, your podcast. I only came across you maybe a couple months ago, maybe 3 months ago. I don't know. I don't know how long ago it was, but the reason why I don't specifically study individuals like Michael Saylor is great and all, but I don't stick to Michael Saylor. The reason why I study
mhm.
different individuals is because I want different experiences. I want different people's ideas. Different people have gone through life in a different way. For example, you played hockey. Me and we can relate in certain ways because I play
Mm-hmm.
hockey. I know how you think. I know how you think as an athlete. So I know for a
Yeah.
fact that you are probably thinking 2, 3, 5 steps ahead. You're skating to where the puck is going to be, as Wayne
Yeah.
Gretzky has said. So
Yeah.
everybody has their own way of thinking. Everybody has their own beliefs of where the world is going. And even if I hate somebody, even if I hate somebody's thoughts, even if somebody's an XRP person, I'm still going to listen to them because I think that everybody has some kind of value that they can add. So the people that I like to listen to, I like Andreas Antonopoulos because he really puts things into very simple terms. I like Michael Saylor. His are more complicated. The only issue with these two is that sometimes they know so much that I can't understand what they're saying. So I like also listening to people who
Yep.
have a very basic understanding. Right there's quite a few podcasts on YouTube that just keep getting better and better. They keep bringing better
Mm-hmm.
and better guests on there. Yours, for example. So if anybody's watching this, subscribe to Brandon. He's putting out really great
Thank
content.
you.
I really appreciate everything that you're doing. But the main point here is that I think that if you're only studying from one person, you're kind of limiting yourself.
I love that. I love that. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the triangulating truth, right? And like
Yes.
it's so I love that. I absolutely love that you said that and took that question that way. Better than I could have even phrased it. What was your any last thing before we get to things you're working on? Any last words? What were some of your aha moments? And I can't remember now if we touched on. I think we danced around this a little bit, but I know you're listening to Sailor. Some different stuff like that over the last handful of years, like during the lockdown time, stuff like that. What were some of the aha moments where you're just like, wow, like this is the game changer. This is like making everything make sense for me now.
The biggest aha moment was I think the first 5 or 6 chapters of the Bitcoin Standard, because the book is called the Bitcoin Standard, but he doesn't touch on Bitcoin until like 7, 8
Yeah,
chapters in.
totally. Yeah.
To me, that
Yeah.
was crazy because I was this I was thinking that Bitcoin is just this thing that it's a technology. You need to understand this
Mm-hmm.
technology. I didn't really see that there are so many parallels to the real world with Bitcoin. Before everybody studies Bitcoin, they're not going to see the parallels. But what Saifedean does is he clearly shows you why Bitcoin is better money compared to the other forms of money that we've ever had. Before his book, I hadn't really seen it that way. I hadn't really even thought of it that way. After I started reading his book, after I got into it, after actually not reading, I listened to audiobooks. So after I listened to his audiobook, it changed my perspective. It made me think gold has been around for thousands of years, and now this thing can potentially compete with gold. And that's this massive. I hadn't made that connection before. I also mentioned another, the real estate video that I watched. Before that, I hadn't really thought of how broken the financial system is. I hadn't really thought of how the financial system is designed to keep real estate investors wealthy, to keep the people who have wealth today, to keep them getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. I don't know if it's designed that way, but it's certainly been the outcome. Whatever they've designed it with, whatever intention they had when they were designing it, that's been the outcome. The outcome has been this wealth gap, and it's getting worse and worse, and it's going to continue to get worse. It's going to continue to make the poor poorer, and there's literally nothing that the poor can do about it unless they adopt Bitcoin.
It's so funny you said that, because I was just talking to my wife about this thing about, like, people. This is where conspiracy theories, partly where conspiracy theories come in, where it's like everyone at every level of bastardization in the economy, it's like, oh, someone must have done this here, had some ulterior motive, and that's why this part doesn't work. And it's funny because when you look at like the oil spill at the top of the river, like when you're downstream and you're like trying to like sift things out of the river, and like the river's all muddy, you can't visibly see the oil spill at the top of the river, like the root source of the problem. You like humans just like look around to find like, oh, it's their fault. They're like, oh, it's that guy's fault. This, the fisherman over there must have like done something to the river, and they can't see 10 miles up the river. And so, and we talked about this earlier about getting away from truth. Like the further you get away, and more layers of lies you put in between yourself and the truth. It's this world where I think it was just like a bunch of central banking family. It was like people who wanted power, right? And they're like, how can we control people? Or like, how can we just hold power for ourselves? But then when like you make that huge decision, that society chooses that leap of like, hey, we're going to the dark side here. It just like spirals on the slippery slope out of control further and further. And everything aligns in a bad way, incentivizes a worse way. But you could have chosen the good way in the binary road. And all those things start spiraling the good way. The incentives like build on each other that way. The snowball rolls both directions down the hill in each way.
Yeah.
And I'm mixing analogies here together, but it's like, because for a long time, again, I was like, oh, this, they must have done this intentionally. And like all these downstream effects, they just happen by the incentive. Like, it's just, a lot of people didn't think of it. So I love that you brought that up, because it's one of those things I think a lot of Bitcoiners think about. And we tend to get into like these conspiratorial things where it's like, no, we just chose to like break the money. And then the snowball just kept rolling down the hill the wrong direction, picking up speed and gaining snow. So just dumber and dumber things happen because we made the ultimate poor decision up top here. So I love that you said that.
Yeah, I don't even think it was intentional, to be honest. I don't think they tried to say that, oh, we're going to ruin these people's lives. That wasn't the goal. I think it just happened because that's just how things work. If you have a broken financial system, you're going to fund people who understand it. You're going to fund the people who have bad intentions. Like, the people who, let's say, for example, Dave Ramsey.
The system is designed that way. Yeah.
Right. Like Dave Ramsey, for example, he owns, in his own words, he owns thousands of rental properties. He says, I can increase the rent whenever I want to. I can increase my cash flow. Why does he need to do that? He doesn't need to, regardless of what happens. And that's what people think that capitalism is.
Yes.
People think that capitalism is just a way for people to make more money. But no, that's not what it is. We've kind of destroyed capitalism by having this fake form of money. There is no capitalism. It's just people who are able to borrow money out of thin air, that's created out of nothing. They're the ones who get ahead. And that's just how the system is designed. The system is designed to work this way because that's just how it works. We've created a system where we think that we should be able to correct where the economic system is going. We should be able to correct the economy. If there's a downside, we should be able to fix it. If there's something that we don't like, we should be able to throw more money at it and fix it. We should be able to, if somebody has feelings about something that something should happen, we want to help them. We want to make sure that their feelings are never hurt. And that's really it. We don't do things based on facts. We do things based on feelings now. And again, that's a result of this fake money. If this fake money wasn't, if we couldn't have fake money, if we couldn't make money out of nothing, we couldn't do all of those things. I think we would look at the world more logically rather than emotionally if the money wasn't broken.
That, boy, do I second that. Yeah, Richard Duncan always was someone I followed for a long time. I haven't followed him in years, but he always said we were in cronyism, or which is like the you hear that a lot, crony capitalism. But he always said creditism, which I thought was really fascinating, and that is. And we go back to this monetary layer is broken, so it just bastardizes the economic model up top. So we don't, like you said, we don't have anything. anything resembling capitalism. I mean, we have things that resemble capitalism, and that's what confuses people. So they think like, well, I'm free to choose certain, see all the ramifications of what you're standing on is broken. So it's distorting the way you're seeing things, and the prism you're looking through. It's just, man, it's just wild.
Just the fact that we have Social Security tells you that it's not capitalism. Like the name of it is Social Security. That's socialism. That's not capitalism.
Just the weaponization of words too. That's a whole different topic for a different day, right? Like Social Security. I mean, everything's designed, the whole system, because it's fiat, right? Like it's fiat. So it's by decree. So like it's weaponizing the words to make you believe things that aren't true. Like the system has to be that. Yeah. Wild. Absolutely incredible. Any last thoughts or anything? I know we've been going for about 2 hours here. It's been incredible, Rajat. Any last words, things that you're working on? Where can people find you?
I really enjoyed this conversation. First of all, thank you so much for having me. This was great. I think I probably tapped into some things in my own mind that I hadn't even realized were there. I'm working on just my YouTube channel, just trying to build I'm trying to create as much content as I can over the next 10 years.
Yeah, you're crushing.
I don't think of it on a day-to-day basis. I don't think of it on a month-to-month basis. Over the next 10 years, I'm going to create as much content as I can. I'm going to create as much value as I can. And that's really what I'm working on. I think the financial benefits are going to come. Whenever they come, they will. But over time, I mean, that's what I'm focusing on. I want people to be able to learn how money works, how Bitcoin works. I want them to be able to build their own financial future so that they don't have to rely on their government to fund their finances anymore. And to me, that's really important. So that's what I'm working on the social media stuff. I have my X, I have my YouTube channel. Those are the ones that I'm most active on. Those are the ones that I'm creating the most content on. Other than that, I mean, I think the best thing that people can do right now is take self-custody. Don't trust anybody. People trusted FTX, and look at where that left them. People trusted BlockFi. Look at where that left them. Take self-custody. Make sure that you take Bitcoin into your own wallet. Don't just leave it on an exchange. It's like we said before. It's like I was mentioning before. You go to a grocery store, you give them the money, but then you leave the groceries there. You don't want to do that. Take Bitcoin into self-custody. Put it into your own wallet. Make sure that you have your own control over it. My goal here is to help as many people to just figure this thing out as possible. Your goal, I'm assuming exactly the same thing. And I think we're going to get to that point at some point. We're going to get there. Eventually, our podcasts are going to be irrelevant because everybody's going to have Bitcoin. Nobody's going to need to learn about it anymore.
Mr. Rajat Soni, thank you so much for joining me here today and being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Brendan. Really appreciate it.
If you like this interview with Rajat Soni, then you're going to love the one we just did with Joe Calasari talking about everything macro and Bitcoin. Check that one out here. Or you might love the one we just did with Larry Lepard, General Lepard himself, talking about the big print, what is coming, his book coming out in the next crash that is coming when the Fed and the governments will be printing over all of it. You're not going to want to miss that here or here. We'll see you inside.